You've heard of Paris, of course, its art, its romance, its charming cafes. But have you ever wondered what lies beneath the city's cobblestone streets? Beneath the Seine, beneath the gaslit alleys, there's a place that's been whispered about for centuries, a place where the dead still walk. It's called the Catacombs, a labyrinth of tunnels and ossuaries built from the bones of the city's past. They were once a place of mass burial, a dumping ground for the dead when the city had no space for them. But the catacombs are more than just a graveyard. They've become a place of legend, of eerie stories passed down through generations. Some say the walls are lined with the whispers of the dead, their voices lingering in the cold air like echoes of a forgotten time. Others claim that the tunnels are haunted by the spirits of those who were buried there, their souls trapped in the darkness, unable to find peace. It's a place where the line between the living and the dead has always been thin. And now, as you listen, I invite you to step into these tunnels with me. Let's uncover the secrets that have been buried for centuries before the shadows swallow us whole. You know, the Paris catacombs didn't start as a graveyard. They were once a place of life, a bustling underground marketplace where people traded goods and even held secret meetings. But things changed when the city decided to bury its dead beneath the streets. The first bones were laid in 1786, when the city started moving bodies from overcrowded cemeteries into these tunnels. But the work wasn't just about burying people, it was about reshaping the city, and the people who built it had to dig deep, both literally and figuratively. By the time the 19th century rolled around, the catacombs had become a tourist attraction, a place where people could walk through the remains of their own city. But the deeper you went, the more the past seemed to call out to you, and not everyone who entered ever made it back. And so, the tunnels became more than a place of burial, they became a space of memory, of history, and of something else entirely. Something that lingers in the silence, waiting to be heard. You remember the first time you heard that faint, echoing whisper in the tunnels, just before the tour guide said, "Now, please don't run." It was like the walls themselves were laughing, or maybe crying. The guide was calm, but you noticed the way they kept glancing over their shoulder, as if the ground beneath their feet might suddenly swallow them whole. You felt it too, that strange, prickling awareness that you were being watched. You tried to shake it off, as everyone else did, but the whispering grew louder, more insistent, like someone was trying to tell you something you didn't want to hear. And then, just as you thought you'd made it through, you saw it. A flicker of movement in the corner of your eye, like a shadow where there should be none. You turned, but nothing was there. Just the cold, unyielding stone. That's when the real fear set in, not of the dark, but of the silence that followed. Because if you could hear it, then it was already here, wasn't it? You've heard the legends of the Paris catacombs, but what about the night they vanished? A group of young lovers, lost in the maze of bones, whispered their vows under the cold stone arches, then vanished without a sound. Their bodies were never found, but their voices were. A faint echo of laughter, a whisper of their names, still drifts through the tunnels as if they're still dancing in the dark, lost in time. Some say the lovers were cursed for their forbidden love, others believe they were taken by the bones themselves. Whatever the truth, the tunnels still remember them, and they still call out for someone to listen. If you ever find yourself wandering the catacombs alone, listen closely. You might hear them, two voices, one story, still waiting to be told. I remember the first time I heard a voice down there, just a whisper, like someone was trying to call out from the dark. It wasn't loud, but it made my skin crawl. A woman in a museum said she felt a hand on her shoulder when she was alone, just for a moment. She turned around, but there was nothing there, just silence and the echo of her own breath. One tourist said he heard a child's laughter, but when he followed the sound, it vanished. He turned back and saw a little girl's doll lying on the ground, forgotten and untouched. And then there's the story of the woman who walked alone at midnight. She said the air turned colder and the walls seemed to breathe. She didn't make it out that night. The accounts are strange, but they're not all made up. Some of these people were there, some of them still are, and some of them never will be. We followed the faint traces of history into the bowels of Paris, where the air grew damp and heavy, like the weight of centuries pressing down on our shoulders. The echo of our footsteps was swallowed by the silence, and for a moment, it felt like we were the only ones who had ever walked these corridors. Then came the whispers, soft, barely audible, like the breath of someone who had long since turned to dust. We found journals, old and brittle, their pages filled with frantic scribbles about voices in the dark and a child's laughter that never stopped. And in the deepest chamber, we found something that made the hair on the back of our necks rise, old photographs of people who had never been seen since the 1800s. You know, the thing that really haunts me about the catacombs isn't the bones or the damp air, it's the one detail that has never been explained. No one can tell you exactly what happened that night. They say a group of young men wandered too deep, got lost, and vanished without a sound. but no one knows if they were scared or if they were just still. The last report was a single word, screaming, but no one knows who it belonged to or if it was a warning or a plea. And that's the part that makes me think, not about ghosts, but about people. About what happens when you lose your way in the dark and no one ever finds you. So the next time you think about the Paris catacombs, remember, sometimes the scariest thing is the silence that follows. You've heard the stories, but have you ever wondered what the Parisians themselves whisper in the dark? Some say the catacombs are the resting place of the city's heart, but others say it's the tomb of something else entirely. There's a local legend that the catacombs are haunted by the spirit of a 19th century seamstress who died in the tunnels during a fire. She is said to appear in the flickering light of a lantern, her voice echoing through the stone. Others believe the tunnels are a gateway to the afterlife, where lost souls wander in search of peace or a way out. Some say they hear whispers in the wind, a language no one can quite understand. And then there are the more outlandish tales. Some say the tunnels are a secret passageway to the city's hidden history, where the dead still walk, guarding the secrets of their lives. So what do you think? Is the catacombs a place of rest, or a place where the dead still remember how to live? There's still no body, no grave, no clear answer to the question of who went down those tunnels and never came back. The mystery isn't just about the past, it lingers in the present, waiting for someone to finally step into the dark and find out what's still there. Every year, new theories pop up, like whispers in the dark. Some say it was a lost child, others a desperate lover, and a few still believe it was a ghost trying to escape its own fate. But no one can prove it. Some say the tunnels are still calling, still waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to follow the path no one should have taken. And if you listen closely, you might hear the faintest sound, like a child's voice, echoing through the stone. So, dear listener, do you think the mystery will ever be solved? Or will it remain just as it has always been, quiet, cold, and waiting for someone to finally step into the dark and find out what's still there? As we leave the catacombs behind, I can't help but wonder, what if the voices we heard weren't just echoes of the past, but whispers from the present, waiting to be heard? You've heard the stories, but have you ever wondered what it's like to walk where the dead once walked, and feel the weight of 1,000 forgotten souls? I sometimes think the most haunted places aren't the ones we visit, but the ones we carry inside us long after we've left. So, my dear listeners, as we turn away from the catacombs, I leave you with this: what will you hear when the silence calls? You've heard of haunted houses, but have you ever heard of a house that haunts its guests? The Whaley House in San Diego has a reputation that's as old as the town itself, and it's not just the ghosts you need to worry about. Built in the 1850s by a wealthy businessman, the Whaley House was meant to be a grand home, but it's since become a place where the past refuses to stay buried. Over the years, dozens of people have stayed there, and not one has left the same. Some say they hear whispers in the hallways, others claim to see a shadowy figure in the upstairs rooms. But the real mystery lies in the disappearances. Some guests never checked out, others were found with no memory of what happened, and a few simply vanished without a trace. Quick word from our sponsor: if this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Fire TV Stick 4K streaming device. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. So, what is it about the Whaley House that turns visitors into ghosts themselves? And why does it still call out to those who dare to stay? You know, the Whaley House didn't start as a spooky place. It was built in the 1850s by a wealthy Southern family, the Whaley clan, who thought they were buying a quiet life in the hills of San Diego. But they didn't realize they were buying a house with a lot of secrets. The Whaleys were a family of merchants, but they had a reputation for being strict and, some say, mean. They treated their servants poorly, and the house became a place of tension, not just for the family but for the workers who lived in the basement. As time passed, more people began to disappear. The house seemed to swallow them whole, and no one could explain where they went. Some said they were taken by the house itself, others that they were never really there to begin with. The Whaley family moved out in the early 1900s, leaving the house to rot. But the stories didn't stop. They kept growing, like the house itself. Some say the house is still waiting for its next victim, and that it never really let go of the people who lived inside. You remember the first time something felt off, don't you? It was just a flicker in the corner of your eye, like a shadow that wasn't quite there. A chill, but not the kind that comes from the wind. Then came the whispers, so faint, so far away, like they were coming from the walls themselves. You turned, but there was nothing. Just the sound of your own breath, echoing back at you. You didn't think much of it at first. You told yourself it was just the house, just the old place, just the way things got when you stayed too long. But deep down, you knew something was watching. And then, the clocks started to stop. Not all at once, but one by one, like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. You began to wonder if the house was trying to tell you something, or if you were just the first one to listen. You see it now, the first guest to vanish, Mr. Davenport, a well-dressed man in a gray suit, standing in the library, his back to the window, staring at the empty chair across from him. The clock ticks, the fire crackles, but the room is silent. His hand moves, reaching for the chair, only to find it gone like it was never there at all. The next morning, the staff finds his suit neatly folded on the bed, his shoes by the door, and a note in his pocket that says, "I saw them. They were waiting." No one knows what he saw, but the staff says he never left the house. His footprints are still on the floorboards, even though he was never there. They say the house doesn't take people, it just takes their stories, and sometimes it forgets to tell them how. I've spoken to dozens of people who say they've been to the Whaley house, but few remember the guests as clearly as the ones who left in the middle of the night. One woman told me she saw a woman in a Victorian dress standing at the front door, just staring at her. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, like she was waiting for something. The woman who saw her said she felt like the ghost was judging her, like she'd done something wrong. Another visitor claimed she heard a child's laughter coming from the second floor, but when she followed the sound, the hallway was empty. She said it felt like the laughter was coming from inside her own head. One man, a retired professor, told me he saw a figure in the garden, but when he turned around, there was no one there. He said it was like the house was watching him, like it knew exactly when he was alone. These aren't just stories, they're echoes of something real. The Whaley house doesn't just haunt the living, it haunts the memory, the mind, the soul. The investigation began with a simple request to look into the disappearances of the Whaley house guests. The sheriff said they had nothing, but the silence was louder than any answer. We dug through the records, and what we found wasn't just missing people, it was missing time. Some guests were never seen again, others were last seen in the garden, and some were found in rooms that weren't theirs. One of the most unsettling finds was a journal, written by a guest who vanished without a trace. The last entry spoke of a presence in the house, a voice that hums in the walls, and a door that opens by itself. The more we looked, the more the house seemed to remember. It remembered the people, the voices, the laughter, and the silence that followed. It remembered everything but the truth. You ever notice how some secrets just don't want to be told? The Whaley house has a way of keeping its guests close, and its truths even closer. One thing we've never been able to piece together: the missing key. The one that was always there and then wasn't. Maybe the key was never meant to open anything. Maybe it was just a reminder of what was never meant to be found. So here's the thing, dear listener. Some mysteries don't need to be solved. Some just need to be remembered and left alone. You've heard the tales of the Whaley house, but some say the real horror is in the stories people still tell. They whisper of a ghost who doesn't want to be seen, just remembered. Some claim the ghost of a woman, dressed in a black lace dress, still wanders the halls, searching for a lost love. Others say she's just a memory, too stubborn to fade. Local elders say the house is alive, and it chooses who can stay and who must leave. Some say it's a warning, a silent judgment on those who dare to linger too long. And then there are the theories. Some say it's not a ghost, but a curse. Others say the house is just a mirror, reflecting our deepest fears back at us. But no one knows for sure. You know, some mysteries just don't ever get solved. The Whaley house has been studied, probed, and debated for decades, but the truth remains like a shadow in the hallway just out of reach. We've had experts, historians, even paranormal investigators, but nothing has ever quite added up. The missing guests? The unexplained disappearances? It's like they were never there at all. Some say it's time to stop chasing ghosts and start listening to the silence. Maybe the real mystery isn't in the past, but in the way we keep telling these stories, hoping someone, somewhere, will finally hear them. And so, the Whaley house remains quiet, watchful, and waiting. For what? We'll never know. But for now, the mystery stays, and the story goes on. You ever notice how some places hold on to the past like a secret they just can't let go of? The Whaley house isn't just a place, it's a memory, a whisper, a story that refuses to fade. Sometimes, the most haunting thing isn't what you see, but what you feel when you're standing there, alone, listening to the silence that doesn't feel quite right. And you know what's really spooky? You can't always tell if the ghost is still there or if it's just the echo of a memory that never left. So, when you think about the Whaley house, don't just think of a haunted home. Think of a place where people once lived, loved, and left behind something that still lingers like a secret that's never been told. And now, dear listener, as the fire dies and the wind picks up, I think I'll leave you with a question. What do you think is still waiting in the Whaley house? You've heard of haunted houses, But have you ever heard of a haunted church? Blythburgh Church, nestled in the Suffolk countryside, is no ordinary place. It's a quiet, crumbling relic of the past where the air seems to hold its breath. This church has stood for centuries, its bell tower still chiming on the hour, but the locals say the bells don't always ring for the living. Some say they ring for the dead. The stories start with the voices, whispers in the pews, laughter echoing through the aisles, and the most chilling of all, the sound of someone calling your name, only to realize you're not alone. Blythburgh Church is not just a place, it's a memory. A place where time seems to pause and the ghosts of the past refuse to be silenced. So, what do you think? Are you ready to step into the silence of Blythburgh Church, where the voices still echo and the past is never far away? You ever heard of a place where the air itself hums with secrets? Blythburgh Church isn't just a building, it's a living memory, carved into the English countryside like a whisper from the past. Built in the 11th century, this church has stood for nearly a millennium, its walls holding stories older than the people who now walk its aisles. It's a place where time feels heavier, and the silence isn't empty, it's full. Now, you might be thinking, what kind of ghosts would live in a place like this? But let me tell you, this church has more than just ghosts. It has voices, and they don't belong to the living. These voices are said to come from the monks who once lived here and from the people who died in the wars that left this church bloodied and broken. They are not just echoes, they are a chorus of the forgotten. And if you think you've heard something strange in the silence, don't be surprised. Because in Blythburgh, the past isn't just remembered, it's spoken. And it won't stop until someone listens. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40 Oz tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You remember the first time you heard it, don't you? A whisper in the back of the church, like someone was trying to get your attention through the cracks in the stone. It wasn't loud, just a voice low, trembling, and full of something that felt like fear. You turned, but there was no one there, just the cold, still air and the sound of your own heartbeat. You started to notice things, little things. A chandelier that swung on its own, a door that creaked open when no one touched it, a scent of damp earth that lingered long after the rain had stopped. And then there were the whispers again, but this time, they weren't just voices. They were names, some familiar, some not. Names of people who had never been there and who still weren't. You asked yourself, what are you doing here, old friend? What do you want? But the answer never came. Just the whisper, the chill, and the feeling that you were being watched. You've heard the whispers, but what about the night they vanished? The air was thick, and the wind carried something more than just cold. A group of young men, just out of college, came to Blythburgh to hear the stories, but they never came back. They arrived at dusk, lured by the promise of mystery and the thrill of the unknown. But something shifted in the air as they crossed the threshold. The bells had stopped ringing, and the silence was too heavy, too complete. They said they heard voices, not from the walls, but from the air itself. A voice calling their names, not in warning, but in longing. It wasn't the ghost of a priest or a lost lover, it was something older, something that had been waiting. When the search teams came, they found nothing but silence. No bodies, no clues, just the echo of a voice that had once been real, now lost to time. And still, in the stillness, some say you can hear it calling, waiting for someone to answer. I've heard from several locals that the voices in Blythburgh Church aren't just echoes of the past. They're like whispers that follow you through the aisles, especially at dusk when the light fades and the silence grows heavier. One woman told me she was there for a wedding, and as the organ played, she heard a voice calling her name over and over in a voice that didn't belong to anyone in the room. Some say the voices are of the people who once worshipped here, trapped in the silence of time, unable to move on. Others believe they're the souls of those who died in the church itself. One thing is certain, the voices don't stop. They linger, like a memory you can't quite shake, even when you know you've left the church behind. We began with a simple enough task, cataloging the church's oldest records. But the first thing we found was a diary from 1821, written by a parishioner who claimed to hear the voices in the nave every Sunday. The ink was faded, but the words were sharp. They speak in tongues, not of God, but of sorrow. The next clue was a set of letters between two clergymen in 1845. One of them wrote, "The voices are not mere echoes. They are alive, and they are not welcome here." The letters were sealed with wax, and the wax had a strange, faint greenish tint. The deeper we dug, the more we realized the voices were tied to specific places. The bell tower, the choir stalls, even the floor tiles beneath the altar. One priest told us, "You can't silence them. They're not ghosts. They're memories." But the most chilling discovery was a series of photographs from the 1930s taken by a local photographer. They showed the same people, same church, but in every shot, there was a figure standing in the back, never moving, never smiling, just watching. No one could say who it was. It became clear that the voices were not just heard, they were felt. A chill in the air, a silence that lasted for minutes, a weight pressing against the back of the neck. The people who had heard them all said the same thing. They were asking for help. You know, the thing that's never been explained? It's not the voices. It's the way they vanish. One moment they're there and the next, they're gone. Like they were never there at all. The parishioners say they hear them at night, just when the candles are dying and the air is heavy with the scent of old incense. Or when the priests come in the morning, they find no trace of them. Some say the voices are the souls of the lost. Others say they're just the echoes of the living, trapped between the world they left and the one they never got to enter. But no one can say for sure. So you listen, you wait, and you wonder if the voices will ever make themselves known. Or if they're just trying to tell you something you're not ready to hear. You've heard the whispers in the pews, the soft hum of the organ, the way the air feels different when the choir sings. Some say it's the ghosts of the past, others say it's the church itself, holding its secrets close. One local legend says the voices belong to a young girl who drowned in the river nearby. Her mother, desperate for closure, once asked the priest to sing a lullaby in the chapel at midnight. The next morning, the priest said he heard her voice in the echo of the stone walls. The town's oldest resident, Mrs. Henshaw, insists the voices are the church's way of remembering. It's not haunted, she says, it's just waiting for someone to listen. But no one dares to stay late at night, not even the caretaker. There's a new theory now, whispered by those who believe the voices are not from the past but from the present, that the church is calling out for someone who's still missing, someone who vanished without a trace. You've heard the stories. Now, the question is, what are you willing to believe? And what are you willing to do when the voices don't stop? You've heard the whispers, but the truth remains locked behind stone and silence. No one can say for sure if those voices are real or just the echoes of a haunted mind. The church has stood for centuries, yet the voices have grown louder in recent years. Some say they've even been recorded, but the recordings fade like a dream upon waking. The church is a place of peace, but it's also a place where the past refuses to rest. Some say the voices are the souls of the faithful, others believe they're the whispers of the damned. No one has ever solved the mystery of those voices. They linger, a ghost in the architecture, a mystery wrapped in centuries of silence and stone. And so, the church remains a place where the living and the lost meet, where the past speaks in voices no one can quite understand. You can almost hear the silence of Blithburg Church, like the world holds its breath just a moment too long. The voices, though distant, echo with a sorrow that lingers long after the last note fades. It's not the sound that haunts you, but the feeling that someone is still here, still waiting. And sometimes, when the light is just right, you might catch a glimpse of a figure standing in the back, never quite moving. So, as we turn the page, remember that the most terrifying stories are the ones that never end. You ever heard of a house that doesn't just scare you, but remembers you? The Whaley House in Santa Barbara isn't just haunted, it's a light asterisk with stories, and some of them never end. Built in the late 1800s, this house was once a place of lavish parties and whispered secrets. But after a fire in 1905, the real story began. People started disappearing, and no one could explain why. The Whaley House isn't just a place, it's a character in its own right. Some say it's waiting for the right person to come back and finish the story it started long ago. So, dear listener, if you ever find yourself wandering through Santa Barbara and feel a chill, don't be surprised if the house looks back at you and remembers you. You see, it all started with a man named Thomas Whaley. He wasn't just any man, he was a real estate tycoon with a taste for the dramatic. He built this house in the 1850s, all stately and grand with a view of the San Francisco Bay. But Thomas wasn't the kind of man to leave things to chance. He wanted his house to be a symbol of power and a place where people would come to be seen. Not just seen, but remembered. The first to vanish was a young woman named Eleanor. She was said to be a poet, a dreamer, and a bit of a ghost in her own right. One night, she vanished without a word, leaving only a half-finished poem on her desk. Then came the lawyer, Mr. Loomis, who had been hired to oversee the house's upkeep. He claimed to hear voices in the night, whispering his name. One morning, he was found dead in his bed, no sign of struggle. And then there was the final guest, a woman named Clara, who claimed to hear the house calling her. She said the walls were alive with secrets and that the house would not let her go. She disappeared the night of her birthday, and her birthday cake was still untouched on the table. You remember the first time you heard the sound, don't you? A soft tapping, like someone knocking on the window, but no one was there. It was just before the lights flickered and the temperature dropped so fast, you could see your breath in the air. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The staff started calling it the Whispering Walls. You could swear the old house was trying to tell them something, just not in words. It was more like a feeling, a sense of being watched. People started to notice things: old photographs moving, doors opening on their own, and a strange smell that wasn't there before. It was like the house was breathing, waiting for something to happen. The air grew heavier, and the silence became louder. You could almost hear the house holding its breath, as if it was about to let something out, something it had been keeping in for a long, long time. You remember the rumors, the whispers that the house had a way of taking people. But what if the real horror wasn't the ghosts, but the people who vanished without a trace? In 1949, a young couple came to stay, eager for a romantic escape. They never left. Their rooms were found empty, the bed linens untouched, but their bodies, well, they were never found. No one knows what happened in that room, but the house has never been the same since. The silence is too loud, and the air is too still, like the house is holding its breath. And so, the house waits for the next curious soul, the next guest, the next disappearance. But maybe, just maybe, it's not the house that's haunted. Maybe it's the people who came to stay. Some guests say they saw a figure in the hallway just before the lights flickered out. A tall, dark silhouette, like a man in a long coat, standing by the door, never moving, just watching. One woman swore she heard a voice calling her name in the night, but when she went to check, there was no one there, just the sound of her own breathing. A man claimed he saw the ghost of a woman in the attic, holding a child, her face twisted in sorrow, but when he tried to reach her, the door slammed shut and the lights went out. Many of these accounts are similar: people seeing shadows, hearing whispers, feeling cold spots, and always the sense that they are being watched. It's as if the house is trying to tell a story, one that no one can quite remember, but everyone feels in their bones. We followed the trail of whispers deep into the archives of the Whaley house, where the dust had settled over decades of unspoken secrets. The records were sparse, but the gaps told their own story. The police reports were brief, almost clinical, but there was something in the tone, a hushed reverence, as if the investigators knew they were treading sacred ground. Then there were the accounts, anonymous letters, written in a shaky hand, describing the same feeling: a presence, a whisper, a door that opened on its own in the middle of the night. One letter, signed by a former staff member, hinted at something deeper, something that wasn't just a ghost, but a memory that refused to fade. The deeper we dug, the more we realized the Whaley house wasn't just haunted, it was holding on to something, something that refused to let go. You ever wonder what happens to the things that never get explained? Like that one detail in the Whaley house story that just disappears. No one ever figured out why the last guest vanished without a trace. It's not like they were never found. The police searched high and low, but there was no body, no trail, just silence. Like the house swallowed the person whole and left no crumbs behind. The last entry in that journal was dated the day the guest vanished. It just said, she was never there. No explanation, no clue, just a sentence that feels like a warning, like the house knows something we don't. And here's the kicker: the same thing happened to the next guest, and the one after that. Like the house is playing a cruel game, luring people in with promises of history, then vanishing them without a whisper. So what's the catch, you asked? What's the one thing that's never been explained? Maybe the house isn't just haunted, maybe it's hungry. You've heard the stories, but what if the real truth is stranger than fiction? Some say the Whaley house doesn't just haunt it, chooses its victims. Local legends claim the house picks its guests, those with secrets, regrets, or unresolved pain. It's not just a place, it's a judge. Some believe the house lures in those who have lost someone, maybe a child, a lover, or a friend, and then it takes them. No one ever comes back. Theories range from ancient curses to a vengeful spirit. But one thing is certain: the Whaley house doesn't just remember its guests, it wants them to return. You know, sometimes the most haunting things aren't the ghosts, but the questions that never get answered. What if the Whaley house isn't just haunted, it's holding on to something it doesn't want to let go? The police closed the case, but the family never did. You think they ever really believe it was just a robbery gone wrong? I don't think so. I think they knew something was still here, waiting. We'll never know what really happened that night. But I think we can all agree, the house has a story to tell, and it's not one we should let fade into the silence. So next time you're out there, walking the path of the lost, remember, some places don't just remember the past, they live in it, and they're waiting for you to listen. You know, sometimes the most haunted places aren't the ones you expect. A quiet room, a forgotten hallway, A single creak in the floorboard, that's where the real ghosts linger. And sometimes, the silence is the loudest whisper. You can feel it, that hush before the story begins, like the house is holding its breath. But don't worry, dear listeners, there's more where this came from. More ghosts, more secrets, and more stories waiting just beyond the next turn of the page. Now, let's not keep the spirits waiting. The next story is just a whisper away, and it's about to get quite a bit louder. You've heard of haunted houses, but what about a haunted church? Blythburgh Church in Suffolk, England, has been whispering for centuries, and no one knows why. Built in the 12th century, it's not the architecture that haunts, it's the voices. Some say they heard them in the 1800s, others in the 1940s, and still others claim they're around today. Local legends say the voices came from a secret chamber beneath the altar, where a tragic love story ended in tragedy. But the truth, like the voices, remains buried. Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, one thing's certain. Blythburgh Church is not silent. It just doesn't speak in words. You know, the first time these voices were heard was back in the 1100s, when this church was just a modest wooden structure, not the stone monument you see today. The monks who built it were more concerned with keeping their prayers quiet than with the whispers that came from the walls. The voices started as a faint hum, like the wind through the rafters, but soon grew louder, clearer. Some say it was the soul of a saint. Others blamed the builder Lord Blyth, who had a reputation for being a bit stubborn. That's a funny way of saying he was accused of witchcraft. By 1300s, the voices had become so persistent that the church was abandoned for a time. It was said that the monks who stayed behind heard voices in the night, sometimes arguing, sometimes singing, and once, a woman's voice weeping for her child. When the church was finally restored, the voices were still there. Some say they were a blessing, others a curse. But what's clear is that these voices have been part of Blythburgh for centuries, woven into its history, its stone, and its silence. You remember the first time you heard it, don't you? A whisper in the rafters, just before the bell rang, like the wind had learned a secret and was sharing it with the stones. It wasn't loud, just there, like a voice that had forgotten how to be quiet. You thought it was the echo of the bells, but it lingered, a voice that had no body, no name. The first time you tried to follow it, you found yourself walking through the same corridor, back and forth, like a pendulum, until you realized you were being watched. You told yourself it was the wind, or the memory of a long-ago funeral. But the whisper grew louder, and you started to wonder if the church had been waiting for someone to listen. And then, one night, you heard it again. Not a whisper, but a voice. And this time, it was speaking your name. You've heard the whispers, but now you're standing in the nave, and the air feels heavier. The voices are louder now, not just echoes, but something trying to reach you. One voice, a woman's, is pleading. It's not in the past tense, it's happening now. The other, a man's, responds with a cold, metallic tone, like a mannequin speaking from a hollow shell. Then, the silence. It's not an absence of sound, it's a presence. The voices stop, the air holds its breath, and for a moment, you're sure you can hear the faintest hum, like the church is still alive. You turn away, but the silence lingers. You feel it in your bones. The church isn't just haunted, it's waiting, and it knows you're here. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. I've spoken with a few locals who say they've heard the voices in the church. One man told me he was sure it was just the wind, but he swore he heard a woman's voice calling his name. Another woman claimed she heard the voices late one night while she was praying. She said they were not words, but a deep, resonant hum, like a bell in the distance but never quite reaching her. Even the priest, who's lived here for decades, admits he's heard them. He said they come at midnight, when the air is still and the silence feels too heavy to bear. They say the voices are not just heard, they are felt. A cold breath, a presence, the feeling that someone is watching you, even when you're alone in the quietest corner of the church. No one knows who they belong to, but the voices remain. They're not just part of the church's past, they're part of the present, whispering through the stones, waiting to be heard. We followed the trail of whispers to a crumbling church in Suffolk, where the air felt thick with something ancient. The silence there was louder than any sound. The priest who led us through the nave said he'd heard the voices since he was a boy, soft, like a lullaby, but always calling his name. He didn't know what they wanted, only that they were never gone. We found a 17th century ledger that mentioned a woman named Eleanor, who'd been accused of witchcraft and buried in the churchyard. Her name was never spoken aloud, only whispered as if afraid to say it. One night, as we sat in the nave, the voices grew louder, almost like a chorus of children playing hide and seek. We couldn't tell if they were mocking us or guiding us towards something we weren't ready to find. By the end of the investigation, we had more questions than answers. The voices didn't vanish, they just changed, became more desperate, more insistent, as if they were waiting for someone to finally listen. You know, the thing that has never been explained? It's not the voices, not the footsteps, not even the cold. It's the whisper that comes from the stone itself, like the church is trying to say something it can't quite put into words. They've heard it in the dead of night, just as the last bell has rung. It's not a voice, really it's more like the stone is breathing, like it's trying to tell a story that's been buried for centuries. And that's the one thing that has never been explained. No one has ever been able to trace the whisper back to a specific location, a specific moment, or a specific person. It just happens. So, do you think the church is trying to tell us something? Or is it just the wind, the stones, and the silence speaking for themselves? I'll leave that to you to decide. You've heard the whispers, but have you ever wondered what the locals truly believe? Some say the voices aren't just echoes of the past, but warnings from the living. A few years back, a local historian claimed the church's bells used to ring at midnight, but only when someone was in mortal danger. No one knows if it's true, but the silence now is louder than the sound ever was. But the most curious part, no one ever confirms the voices. They're just there, in the silence, like the faint hum of a radio that's been turned off. You can almost hear them if you listen closely. Some say the church is still alive, still watching, still waiting. And if you ever find yourself standing alone in the silence, you might just hear something that isn't meant for you. The voices still come, but now they're quieter, like whispers caught in the wind. Some say they're the souls of the ones who never found peace, still waiting for someone to hear them. The local historian says the voices are a sign that the church is still haunted, but others believe it's a trick of the mind, a trick that's been playing on the town for over 100 years. Some say the voices are a warning, a sign that the past hasn't truly left the place. Others say they're just the church's way of remembering the people who once worshipped there, still listening for their names. And so, the mystery lingers, not in a scream or a shadow, but in the silence between the voices. A silence that says, I am still here. The voices still come, but now they're quieter, like whispers caught in the wind. Some say they're the souls of the ones who never found peace, still waiting for someone to hear them. You can almost hear the wind whispering through the rafters, like it's trying to tell you something you're not meant to understand. There's a kind of silence here that isn't empty, it's full of something waiting, just out of reach. Sometimes, the most terrifying things are the ones that never speak, just linger, like ghosts in the corners of your mind. And as you leave, you wonder if the voices you heard were ever real or if they were just the echo of your own fear. But remember, the stories don't end here. They wait in the silence, just beyond the next turn. You've heard of the Baskervilles, but what about the Hound? A beast that never sleeps, a legend that never dies. It's said to haunt the moors of Devon, where the wind whispers secrets and the shadows dance like ghosts. This place has a history as deep as the moor itself. It's where the Baskerville family once ruled, and where the Hound first took its terrifying form. Some say it was a curse, others a warning, no one knows for sure. There are stories, you know, of men driven mad by the Hound's howl, of women who vanished without a sound. The moor is a place of silence and secrets where even the trees seem to watch and wait. The Hound is more than a beast, it's a symbol, a shadow of the past. Some say it's a warning, a reminder of the sins that haunt the Baskerville name. But what really happened here? That's the question we're here to answer. So, dear listener, if you're looking for truth, you'll have to follow the Hound into the dark. But be careful once you step onto these moors. The moors may step back into you. You know, the Baskerville legend started not with a ghost, but with a man named Henry Jekyll. A doctor, a scientist, a man who wanted to unlock the secrets of human nature. But he didn't just unlock secrets, he unlocked something far more dangerous. Jekyll was obsessed with the idea of separating good from evil within a man. He believed in the duality of human nature, and he thought he could control it. But control is a tricky thing, especially when the beast inside refuses to be tamed. The Hound wasn't just a monster, it was a symbol of the beast within him. A creature born from fear, from guilt, from the darkness that lingers in every man's heart. And when Henry Jekyll died, the Hound didn't die with him. The family that followed him inherited the curse. They were told to never walk the moors at night, never to speak of the Hound, and never to trust the dark. But some secrets are too heavy to carry, and some fears are too deep to ignore. And so the legend of the Hound of the Baskervilles was born not as a ghost, but as a warning. A story passed down through generations, whispered in the dark, and never fully understood. But some stories, my friends, are never truly finished. You remember the first time you heard the Hound's growl, didn't you? A lull, what sounded like a dog in a storm, but it wasn't a dog at all. It was something older, something that had been waiting for a long time. The growl came from the moors, from the shadows where the trees seemed to lean closer, as if they were listening. It wasn't a sound you could explain, just a sound that made your bones go cold. The first signs were subtle, like a chill in the air before a storm, a faint smell of damp earth, a distant howl that wasn't quite howl, and a feeling that the moors were watching you. And then, the first real sign, someone missing a shoe. Not just missing, but gone. A boot left behind, and no one knows where the other one went. You think, maybe it's just a trick of the wind, but you're not sure, are you? You start to wonder if the moors have a way of taking things, people, shoes, even time itself. And so, the first signs begin. Not of a ghost, but of something that has been waiting, watching, and waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. You remember the storm, don't you? The night the skies split open and the wind howled like a wounded beast. That was the night the Baskerville hound vanished, and with it, the last hope of the family name. The hound was never seen again, just the echo of its growl, the scent of damp earth and fear, and a single blood-stained boot print in the mud, leading away from the manor. But the real mystery was the hound itself. Was it a beast of legend, or something far more human? And why did it vanish without a trace, leaving only the scent of dread in its wake? No one knows what happened that night, but some say the hound was never real. Some say it was a man who wore a mask and a coat, and some say it was the family's own guilt, creeping out of the walls and into the night. The Baskervilles never recovered. The house was sold, the name faded, and the hound became a cautionary tale, a lesson in greed and fear, and in the price of a legacy that was never meant to be kept. And so, the hound disappeared, but the story, it's still here, waiting for someone to listen, to remember, and to wonder what it was, really, that went out with the storm. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dub 10th smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. I've spoken to dozens of people who claim to have seen the beast, but no one can agree on what it looks like. One said it had eyes like glowing embers, another said it was more like a shadow with claws. A man from Baskerville Hall said he saw it pacing the moor at midnight, just before the last of the villagers vanished. He swore it had a sound like a dog's growl, but no mouth. A woman from the village told me she heard the beast howling in the distance, but when she went to investigate, there was only a cold wind and the scent of something old and damp. And then there's the story of the man who tried to capture it with a camera. He swore the lens focused perfectly, but when he looked at the screen, there was nothing but a black hole. So you tell me, dear listener, what do you think the beast truly is? A warning? A ghost? Or just a reflection of the fear that lingers in the hearts of those who walk the moor at night? The investigators began with the old manor, its windows like hollow eyes watching from the hill. They walked the grounds, feeling the weight of history in every step. They found old journals tucked in the floorboards, their pages brittle with age. The ink had faded, but the fear remained, written in trembling hands. In the library, they found a portrait of Sir Charles, his eyes seeming to follow them. The frame had a crack that ran like a tear down his face. The local priest told them about the old legend of the hound, a beast that roams the moor at night, driven by the curse of the Baskervilles. He said it was not a beast, but a man. The most unsettling thing was the sound, a low growl echoing through the manor at midnight. The investigators found no source, only the feeling of being watched. As the days passed, the case grew colder, the clues more elusive. But one thing was clear: the hound was not just a ghost, but a warning. You know, the thing that's really bugged me about the Baskervilles is that no one ever figured out what the hound actually was. Was it a beast? A spirit? Or just a man in a costume with a really good scream? Some say it was a wild dog, others say it was a trained animal, but no one ever saw it again after the last sighting. It's like the hound just vanished into the moor, like it was never really there at all. So here's the thing: maybe the hound was never real. Maybe it was just a story, a warning, a way to scare the living. But if that's the case, why does it still haunt us today? Why do we still tell this tale? Perhaps the real mystery isn't the hound, it's the silence. The silence that followed, the silence that still lingers. Maybe the hound was just the beginning of something much bigger, something we've never been able to explain. So I'll leave you with this: if you ever find yourself walking the moor at dusk, and you hear a distant, mournful howl, don't look back. Just keep walking. And remember, some stories are better left untold. You've heard the name, but the stories, they're as tangled as the moor itself. Some say the hound was a real beast, others say it was a curse. But what if the real mystery isn't the hound at all? Local farmers still tell tales of a shadow moving in the dark, too fast for the eye to follow. They say it's not the hound, it's the man, the one who was never found. Theories abound, but the truth, it's still buried in the moor, where the wind carries the echoes of a name no one dares to say aloud. And so the legend lives on, not just in the hound, but in the silence that follows. What if the real mystery isn't what happened, but what we're afraid to remember? You know, some mysteries don't just fade away, they cling to the edges of our lives like a whisper in the dark. The Baskervilles case is one of those. It lingers unresolved like a shadow on the wall. The police closed the case, but the truth, it's still out there, hiding in the spaces between the facts. Like a ghost, it refuses to be pinned down. So the next time you hear that hound howl in the night, maybe you'll think of Stapleton. Or maybe it's something else entirely. Something still waiting to be found. But remember, dear listener, some mysteries are meant to linger. They're not meant to be solved. They're meant to remind us that the dark still has its secrets. So, I'll leave you with this: keep your doors locked, your windows closed, and your stories open. Because sometimes, the best stories are the ones that never end. You know, sometimes the greatest mysteries aren't solved, but they're never really forgotten. And some legends, like the Hound of the Baskervilles, live on in the stories we tell around the fire. As the last embers fade, the silence feels heavier, like the air itself is holding its breath. You can almost hear the hound's shadow in the distance. But for now, let's leave the hound to the wind and the wild. The fire is low, the night is deep, and the next story is waiting. So, shall we go on? The next tale is just a whisper away, ready when you are. You've heard of the Philippines, but have you ever wondered what lies beneath its tangled jungles and rusted barbed wire? There's a place where the earth remembers, and the air holds the breath of the forgotten. This isn't just any battlefield. It's a place where history doesn't just lie, it lingers. A place where the echoes of war are still trapped in the soil, waiting for the right moment to rise. Some say the land here is cursed, that the spirits of the fallen don't rest, that every step you take is a whisper from the past, a reminder that this place was never meant to be forgotten. And so, we come to this place, a crossroads between history and the unknown. A place where the weight of the past is heavier than the air and the silence is louder than any scream. You ever heard of the Philippines in 1942? It wasn't just a war, it was a brutal, desperate fight for survival. And then, it turned into something far worse. The Japanese army had marched into the Philippines, and the Americans and Filipinos were fighting to hold the line. But they were outnumbered, outgunned, and out of options. They were told to surrender, but the Americans and Filipinos refused. So the Japanese decided to take them prisoner and then to make an example of them. The death march was no march. It was a long, slow walk to a fate that no one wanted to face. And it started with a decision that would haunt the world for decades. You see it now, the first crack in the road, a faint line of dust where the soldiers once walked. You can almost hear the echo of their footsteps, though no one's left to say where they went. The trees don't whisper here like they do in other places. They just stand, watching, as if they remember what happened in the shadows of their branches. You look down at your boots, and you wonder if they've ever stepped on anything that wasn't earth. But then you remember there was more than earth here once. And then you see it as small, rusted tin can half buried in the dirt. You lean in, and for a moment, you feel like you're not alone. It's the first sign that something was terribly wrong. Not just the land, but the air, the silence, the way the world seemed to hold its breath. You see it now, the moment that changed everything. The sun, once bright, now hangs low, casting long shadows over the dusty path. The soldiers, weary and defeated, stumble forward, their eyes wide with fear, not for the enemy, but for what lies ahead. The air is thick with the scent of earth and sweat, but something else lingers, something heavier. A quiet dread, like the weight of the past pressing down on their shoulders. They don't know what's coming, but they feel it. A silence falls. It's not the kind of silence that means safety, but the kind that means something terrible is about to happen. The soldiers exchange glances, but no one speaks. They've all heard the stories, but none of them believe they'll have to live it. Then it happens. The officers give the order. The soldiers don't move. The air is heavy, thick with the weight of history and the knowledge that they are about to witness something no man should have to see. The moment is frozen in time, a moment that will not be forgotten, though it was meant to be erased. And so, the march continues, not with the sound of footsteps, but with the echo of a crime that will never be spoken of. I remember the first time I heard about Baton. A retired nurse in Florida told me about the survivors who returned, their hands shaking with the memory of what they'd seen. It wasn't just the march, it was the silence that followed. One man, a former soldier, said he saw a group of prisoners collapse in the mud, their faces turned upward, like they were praying. He didn't know if they were dead or alive. He just kept walking. A survivor once described the air as thick with the smell of blood and earth. He said it wasn't the stench of death, but of something more final. Like the land itself had remembered. Some of the accounts mention a strange light, like the sun had been extinguished and replaced by something else. A cold, blinding glow that seemed to come from the ground itself. And then there are the voices. Some say they heard them in the night, whispering in a language they couldn't understand. Others say they heard nothing at all, just the weight of the silence. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Depth smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. We followed the trail of old maps and faded photographs, tracing the last known steps of those who vanished. The air smelled of damp earth and something older, like the memory of a scream. At one site, we found a rusted tin can, still sealed shut, and a set of rusted chains buried in the soil. It felt like the ground itself was holding its breath. We found a piece of a uniform, a faded name tag still clinging to it, and a single, unmarked grave site where no one had ever dared to dig. And then there was the sound, a low, steady hum, like a heartbeat, coming from the ground itself. It was as if the earth was remembering what it had buried. The more we uncovered, the more we realized this wasn't just a story. It was a wound, and the land was still bleeding. You ever wonder why the Baton Death March is still remembered, but the final miles of that march? No one knows what happened there. It's like the last chapter of a book was just erased. The only thing we know for sure is that somewhere in those final miles, hundreds of men died, and the silence around that part of the march is louder than any scream. Some say it was a massacre. Others say it was a massacre that was never properly recorded, and no one has ever been able to find the bodies. No one has ever been able to find the truth. The only thing we can say for sure is that the final miles of the Baton Death March were the last, quiet moments of a terrible, unspoken horror. And that's all we have left to remember. You ever wonder what happens to the stories we can't quite let go of? The ones that drift through the towns like ghosts, carried on the wind and whispered behind closed doors. In Baton, the stories are like the land itself, deep, unyielding, and always waiting to be unearthed. They say the earth remembers, and the trees know the names of those who never made it home. Some say the spirits of the dead still walk the hills, drawn by the scent of salt and the sound of distant waves. Others believe the land itself is mourning, holding its pain close like a secret. And then there are the quiet ones, those who don't speak of the massacre at all. They just look at the hills, the sea, and the old roads and feel something ancient stir beneath their feet. Maybe the truth is never meant to be found. Maybe some stories are meant to linger, like the taste of something sweet and terrible, left just out of reach. You know, sometimes the truth is more terrifying than the legend. We're still waiting for the final piece of this puzzle, and it's not in a museum or a book, it's in the silence between the stories. There are no more graves to dig, no more bones to uncover, but the questions remain. Who was left behind, and who was never meant to be found? The silence is the loudest sound now. It lingers in the air like a ghost, waiting for someone to remember, to ask, to finally listen. And maybe, just maybe, the truth is not buried at all. It's waiting in the spaces between the stories, in the echoes of the past that still call out to us. You walked with me through the silence of a battlefield, through the weight of history and the sorrow of the lost. Now, as the last echoes fade, let's not forget the faces behind the stories. These ghosts don't haunt for vengeance, but for remembrance. They whisper of courage, of pain, and of the price of freedom. Can you hear them, just beyond the edge of your mind? So as we turn the page, remember that every story we tell is a bridge between the past and the present. And sometimes, that bridge is built on silence. But before we go, I want to ask you, what do you carry from today's tale? A memory, a question, or perhaps a ghost of your own? You've heard the name, but have you ever stood beneath the ancient stones of Baskersville Hall? It's not just a house, it's a living memory. A place where time seems to pause and the air feels heavier than the night sky. This isn't just a Gothic relic, it's a place where whispers of the past cling to the air like damp moss. Some say the wind carries the footsteps of a hound that never rests, and the trees here seem to lean in, as if they know the truth. The Baskersvilles were a family of great wealth and terrible secrets. Their name is etched into the stones, but their legacy is etched into the land itself. It's said the curse began with a man who dared to defy the natural order, and now, over a century later, the house stands silent. The moor stretches wide, and the legend of the hound lives on, not in a book, but in the air, in the stories passed down, and in the stories that refuse to be told. You see, the tale of the Hound of the Baskersvilles began not with a ghost, but with a man named Sir Hugo Baskersville. He was a nobleman in the 1600s, known for his wildness and his obsession with the devil. Legend has it that he made a pact with a demon in exchange for power and wealth. The demon, however, demanded a price: his own family's bloodline would be cursed for generations. The hound became a symbol of fear and fate, passed down through the Baskersville line. Every generation, it was whispered that the hound would return to claim the next heir. The curse was never just about the hound, it was about the sins of the past, the greed, the betrayal, and the blood that had been spilled in the name of power. So when Sherlock Holmes came to Devon, he wasn't just chasing a mystery, he was stepping into the shadow of a curse that had haunted one family for over 2 centuries. You remember how the Bakersville family always kept the hound in the shadows, like a secret they were too afraid to speak of. But one evening, the hound didn't come home from the moor. The next morning, the housekeeper found the hound's leash lying on the doorstep, damp and cold, as though it had been left there by someone who didn't want to be found. The Baskervilles started to whisper. Some said the hound had run off in grief, others that it had been taken by the very thing it was meant to guard against. But the hound's absence left a silence that felt more like a warning than an explanation. And that silence grew louder every day. You remember the moment the hound vanished, don't you? It was like the world held its breath, and the air turned to ice. Sir Henry stood frozen, eyes wide, as if he'd seen a ghost that wasn't there. The hound was there, just moments before, its eyes glowing like embers in the dark. Then, nothing. Just silence. And a sound, like a low growl echoing from the earth itself. The next morning, the hound was gone. But the moor didn't forget. It remembered the growl, the fear, the way the earth seemed to swallow the beast whole. And it remembered Sir Henry's terror. They say the hound was never real, but I've seen the scars on the moor, the way the wind whispers through the stones. And I've heard the growl, even if you haven't. You've felt it, haven't you? I've spoken with several elderly locals who claim to have seen the hound in the shadows of Baskerville Hall. One man swore he saw it pacing the moors with a red glow in its eyes, like a ghost with a lantern. Another witness said it wasn't just a dog, it had the shape of a man, twisted and monstrous, with a glowing red collar that pulsed like a heartbeat. There's even a letter from a former groundskeeper, now in his 90s, who claimed the hound would appear at the edge of the garden, always waiting for the master to return. And then there's the one who never came back. A woman who lived in the house for years, who swore the hound was waiting for her to leave. She vanished one night, and no one saw her again. The hound is still there, waiting, and the moors are full of eyes that never close. The local constable, a man with more stories than he knew what to do with, led us to the old Baskerville estate. He spoke of the family like they were ghosts, and of Stapleton with a kind of reluctant reverence. We found the old hunting lodge, where Stapleton had once plotted his schemes. The air smelled of damp wood and forgotten secrets, and the floorboards creaked like they were alive. We found a map, half burned and faded, tucked inside an old ledger. It showed the path Stapleton had taken, marked with strange symbols and a single red X near the cairn. The final clue was a letter, written in a trembling hand, warning of a curse that would fall upon those who dared to repeat the old family sins. And so, we stood at the edge of the moor, the wind at our backs, the past whispering through the trees. What would you do if the ghost of the past refused to stay buried? You know, there's one thing about the Baskervilles that's always puzzled me. The hound wasn't just any dog, it was a symbol, a curse, a warning. But what if the real mystery wasn't the hound at all? What if it was the silence? The absence of a voice that should have been there. The hound was described in detail, its eyes, its scars, its size. But what about the man who first saw it? The one who claimed it was the ghost of Stapleton. He vanished too, and no one ever found his body. No body, no trace. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. They say the hound was real, but they never found it. They say it was a trick, but they never found the man who made it. And here's the kicker, it's never been explained. Not one single detail. Not the shape of the hound's eyes, not the sound of its growl, not even the exact time it was seen. It's like the whole thing was written in a language we can't read. Like the hound was never meant to be seen, only felt. And the silence that followed wasn't just an absence, it was a choice. A decision to let the mystery stay. So, dear listener, what do you think? Was the hound real, or was it just a story that never ended? And if it was real, where is it now? Still watching? Still waiting? Or has it finally disappeared, like the man who first saw it? Some say the hound isn't just a beast, it's a memory of a man who cursed the land, or a ghost who never left. What if the Baskervilles were never real, but a warning? In the village, they whisper that the hound was never a dog, but a man transformed by guilt and fear. Did he truly vanish, or did he become something else entirely? Some believe the hound is a trickster, a myth made real by those who wanted to protect the family's secrets. Maybe the real mystery isn't the hound, but the Baskervilles themselves. And then there are those who say the hound never vanished, it's still out there, waiting for the next Baskerville to step into the shadows, waiting for you. So here we are, still chasing shadows in the Baskerville moor, and the truth remains as elusive as a ghost in the fog. No body, no clue, just the echo of a legend. The last letter from Stapleton was never found, and the last scream from the moor was never heard. We're left with a silence that speaks louder than any explanation. Some say the moor itself is a character in this story, watching, waiting, and whispering secrets to those who dare to listen. And so, dear listener, the Bakersfields vanish into the mist, not as a tale to be solved, but as a story to be remembered until the next storm rolls in. You know, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that never quite end. Like the Hound of the Bakersfields, it lingers like a shadow in the corners of your mind, whispering, what if it's still out there? We chase ghosts for their secrets, but sometimes the secret is that they never left. They just wait, patient as the dark, for someone to remember them. So when you hear the baying in the night, don't be surprised. Sometimes the hound doesn't need to be real to be terrifying. Sometimes it just needs to be remembered. And if you ever find yourself walking the moor at twilight, don't look back. The hound might still be waiting, and it's never too late for a story to begin again. You've heard the stories about the Jersey Shore, right? Those sunny beaches and boardwalks, but there's a shadow in the surf. You ever wonder what happens when the waves pull people under and never let them back out? There's a place out there, just off the coast, where the water turns from blue to black. You've heard the locals call it the Devil's Hole. It's not on any map, but it's whispered about in bars and backrooms like a secret they're too afraid to share. The stories say that the water is warm, but it pulls you in like a siren song. You think you're just swimming, but then the current gets stronger. It's not the cold that kills, it's the silence. The water is too quiet, like it's holding its breath. And then there's the smell. You don't think about it at first, but it lingers. A metallic, briny tang that clings to your skin. It's not the ocean, it's something else. Something that has been there long before the shore was built, and it's been waiting for you. You think you're just hearing tales, but the people who have seen it, those who have gone in and never come back, they know the truth. The water doesn't just take them, it takes their memories, their voices, and leaves only silence in their place. So when you're out there, remember this, the ocean doesn't always give up its secrets. Sometimes, it just takes them and leaves you wondering what you've already lost. You know, the first whispers of this tragedy came from a small town on the Jersey Shore where the ocean meets the shore with a quiet, almost mournful rhythm. It was the early 1980s, and the place was known for its boardwalks, its soft-kissed air, and its quiet sense of community. The people there were like family neighbors who knew each other by their first names, and who shared more than just meals. But then, one summer, something changed. A sense of unease settled over the town like a heavy fog, and no one could quite say why. The first official report came from a young woman who claimed she saw someone in the woods near the shore. She said the person was dressed in a white dress, and their face was obscured by the mist. But no one could find them, and the search turned up nothing. As the days passed, more people began to vanish, some reported missing, others never seen again. The police were baffled, and the town was left to wonder if something supernatural had taken root in the very land that had once been their sanctuary. And so, the legend began to take shape, a tale of disappearances, of shadows and silence, and of a place that had once been warm and familiar, now turned into something else entirely. Something that still lingers, waiting for the next curious soul to wander too close. You know how sometimes, even in the best of times, things just don't feel right. Like the air gets heavier, and the waves seem to whisper secrets you can't quite catch. The first sign was a missing boat. No one noticed at first, just a small fishing skiff gone, with no one aboard. A little odd, but nothing to make you look twice. Then came the rumors. Some said the sea had taken them. Others whispered that the water was too calm, too still, like it was holding its breath. The last thing anyone saw was a pair of eyes, glowing faintly in the dark, watching from the water's edge. No one knows who they belonged to. No one knows if they were ever real. And now, you wonder, what if the sea never let them go? What if it's still waiting for them to come back? You know, sometimes the most terrifying stories aren't the ones that end in blood, but the ones that vanish without a trace. That's what happened here, on the Jersey Shore, where the ocean whispers secrets and the sand holds memories. In the summer of 1963, a group of young women from a small town in New Jersey came to the shore for fun, laughter, and a break from life. They were just kids, full of dreams and a little too much confidence. No bodies were found, no footprints in the sand, just the sound of the waves and the memory of laughter that never returned. The town whispered, but no one knew what to believe. To this day, the shore is still a place of wonder and fear. Some say the ocean remembers, others say it never let them go. But one thing is certain, those girls were never the same after that night. I remember the day it all began, like it was yesterday. A quiet afternoon, the ocean calm, the sun low and golden. Then, the silence. It was as if the world held its breath. A woman from nearby said she saw them just for a moment. She was walking her dog, the sun behind her, and she swore she saw a group of figures standing in the surf, just still, not moving, not breathing. One man claimed he heard their laughter, carried on the wind like a ghostly echo. He said it was too loud, too clear, like they were right there, just out of reach. He never told anyone, not even his wife. Even the locals who should have known better began to whisper. Some said they saw the lights, others said they heard the voices, and then there were those who said they saw them and never spoke of it again. They were never the same after that. Not the ones who saw them, not the ones who heard them. And now, as I sit here, I wonder, what did they see? What did they hear? And why do we still feel their presence, even now? We followed the trail of clues like breadcrumbs in a storm and found ourselves standing in the old police station where the silence was louder than the sirens ever were. The walls seemed to hum with forgotten voices, and every corner held a story we couldn't quite grasp, like the air itself was holding its breath. One note, written in the victim's own voice, said, "They're not gone. They're still here. Watch and then it ended with a single tear-stained word, help. The deeper we dug, the more the case felt like a ghost trying to whisper its secrets, only the ghost never gave up the same story twice. What we found wasn't just a case, it was a puzzle, and the pieces were still scattered, waiting for the right hands to piece them together. You know, there's one thing that has always bugged me about this case. It's not the missing bodies or the eerie silence of the shore. It's the one detail that no one ever talks about. The one thing that just doesn't fit. The police said the last call came in at 9:17 p.m. But that's not what the phones said. The phones didn't ring. They just stopped. No one answered. No one called. It's like the night just got out. Like the world forgot to breathe. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. Now, I know people say the ocean takes what it wants. But this wasn't just a disappearance. This was a vanishing. Like the world had a switch flipped, and suddenly, those people were gone. No footprints, no sound, no sign. And here's the thing, no one was ever able to find the bodies. Not even the ones who knew where to look. It's like they never existed. Like the shore just forgot them. And that's the one detail that has never been explained. You've heard the names, but what about the stories? Some say the waves themselves remember. Others whisper that the victim's laughter still echoes through the boardwalk at dusk. Local legends say the missing never truly left. Some say they're still out there, in the surf, in the sand, in the places where the tide never reaches. There's a tale about a lighthouse keeper who saw them. He said they were dancing on the rocks, laughing, not afraid of the dark. But when he tried to follow, the light went out, and he never spoke of it again. And then there are the ones who think it's not the water at all, it's the land itself. The Jersey Shore, with all its secrets, has a way of swallowing people whole, and never letting them go. These are the stories people still tell, not for fear, but for connection. To remember, to honor, to keep the voices alive, even if only in the dark. You know, sometimes the most haunting thing about a mystery isn't the missing people, it's the silence that follows. No bodies, no graves, no answers, just the echo of what might have been. We've combed through every file, every rumor, every whispered tale, but nothing adds up. It's like the sea swallowed them whole, and the water's still too quiet for that. There's a strange comfort in knowing the world has moved on, but the past clings to the coast like the tide. It lingers in the wind, in the silence, in the way the waves never quite stop whispering. And so we wait, hoping that somewhere, somehow, the truth will rise from the sea. But for now, we're just left with the questions and the quiet, watching waves. You've heard the stories, felt the chill, but sometimes the most haunting silence is the one that follows. What if the shore's not just haunted by the past, but by something still waiting? The shore has always been a place of wonder and mystery, but maybe it's also a place where the lost still linger, holding on to the last thread of their lives. Maybe the real mystery isn't who vanished, but what they left behind: memories, secrets, and the weight of a place that never truly lets go. As the sun dips below the horizon, the shore turns to shadow, and sometimes the silence is louder than any sound. So, dear listener, when you walk the shore, remember, the water may be calm, but the stories it holds are anything but. You've heard of haunted hotels, but the Stanley Hotel? That's a place where the past won't stay in the lobby. It's in Colorado, high up in the Rockies, and it's got a story that's been whispering through the trees for decades. Built in the early 1900s, it was once a grand escape for the wealthy and the weary. But the real magic, it's not in the views or the luxury, it's in the way the building seems to remember every guest who ever stepped inside. Some say the hotel has a soul, or maybe it's just that the spirits of the people who lived, loved, and died here have left their fingerprints on every room, every hallway, every corner. But what really makes the Stanley Hotel special? Well, it's not just the ghosts, it's the stories. The ones that linger in the silence, the ones that whisper through the walls, and the ones that you can still hear if you're lucky enough to stay long enough. So, as we step into the story of the Stanley Hotel, let's take a moment to ask ourselves, what would you do if you found yourself alone in a place that remembers everything? Back in 1879, a young man named George Stanley bought a piece of land near the Colorado Rockies. He had big dreams and even bigger plans for a hotel that would change the region forever. He didn't just build a hotel, he built a legacy. The Stanley Hotel would be the first luxury resort in the area, offering comfort and elegance to the wealthy and the weary alike. But the land had a past. Before Stanley's vision, it was a place of quiet suffering, where a small mining town had been abandoned after a mine collapse claimed dozens of lives. The workers who built the hotel often spoke of strange sounds and night whispers and footsteps that echoed through the unfinished halls. Some said the ground itself seemed to breathe. The hotel finally opened in 1909, a masterpiece of architecture and ambition. But even then, the whispers never stopped. Some say the hotel was built on the bones of the town that came before it. And so, the Stanley Hotel was born from both dreams and darkness, a place where the past refused to stay buried. You remember the first time you noticed something was off. It was just a feeling, like the air had changed. A quiet shift in the atmosphere that made your skin prickle, as if the hotel itself was holding its breath. The sound of footsteps echoed, but no one was there. You turned around, and the hallway was empty, yet the chill of something unseen clung to you like a second layer of skin. One night, you heard a voice, soft, distant, and barely audible. It wasn't a scream, but something worse. A whisper of pain, a plea for help, or maybe just a memory that refused to be forgotten. You told yourself that was just your imagination, but the hotel had other ideas. It had a story to tell, and it wasn't going to let you walk away without hearing it. You remember the moment the silence turned to something else entirely. The lights flickered, and the air grew thick with an unspoken dread, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The staff called it a whisper in the night, a sound so soft, so distant, it was easy to dismiss. But for those who heard it, it was a warning, a presence, a voice that never belonged to anyone. And then came the disappearance. A man who had worked the hotel for years vanished one night, leaving behind only a trail of wet footprints leading into the dark, and a door left ajar, as if someone had been trying to call for help. No one saw him leave. No one heard him call for help. The only clue was a single, unopened envelope found in his desk, bearing his name and a date just days before he disappeared. To this day, the hotel still holds its breath. The whispers return, the footsteps echo, and the silence grows heavier. Some say the man is still here, trapped between the past and the present, waiting for someone to listen. I remember the first time I heard it, a low, wet sound, like a hand dragging across wet pavement. It wasn't a laugh, it wasn't a scream, it was something in between, something that made the hair on the back of my neck rise. One of the waiters, a man named Henry, swore he saw a woman in the lobby, dressed in a 1920s flapper outfit, her face pale as a ghost, her eyes fixed on the elevator. Some say she was the ghost of a lost love, someone who never made it out of the hotel's depths. Others say she was a woman who once worked here, who got trapped in a loop of time, stuck between the past and the present. What I know for sure is this: the Stanley Hotel doesn't just hold memories, it holds voices, it holds stories, and sometimes it holds something that doesn't want to be found. And if you ever find yourself standing in that lobby, waiting for the elevator, listen closely. You might just hear her again. The team arrived at the Stanley Hotel with a list of questions and a heavy heart. They weren't just looking for ghosts, they were seeking answers to the unanswered. They started with the old employee records, sifting through yellowed pages, searching for names and dates that might connect the past to the present. One name kept coming up: Evelyn, a maid who vanished in 1947. No body, no explanation, just a room that had been locked from the inside and left untouched for decades. The team found a diary in the attic, written in a shaky hand, entries filled with fear and confusion. She was never there, but she was always watching. As they pieced together the fragments, a strange pattern emerged, a series of disappearances, all tied to the same floor, the same room, and the same name: Evelyn. You know, there's one thing that's always bugged me about the Stanley Hotel. It's not the ghosts or the whispers in the halls. It's the one detail that has never been explained. Every story, every account, every whisper about the hotel has a thread. But there's this one thing, this single, impossible detail that just vanishes, like it never existed. You think about it, don't you? You imagine the moment it disappeared. Was it erased, forgotten, or was it never meant to be found at all? And that's what haunts me most. Not the ghosts, or the stories, or the cold spots. It's the silence, the absence, the thing that never got a chance to be explained. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You've heard the stories, but what about the ones the locals still tell? They say the hotel's bones whisper secrets only the old can hear. Some say the ghosts are just the echoes of the staff who vanished, never to be seen again, like the janitor who disappeared in 1944. There's even a rumor that the hotel's architect, a man named Fred, cursed it during construction, his own death a mystery to this day. And then there are the guests, those who claim they hear laughter or feel a cold hand on their shoulder, but never speak of it afterward. So what do you think? Are the whispers real, or just the stories we tell to keep the dark from coming? There's still no answer to the question, who was that woman in the elevator? We've looked through every old photo, every security tape, every forgotten record, and still, she's just a whisper in the dark. Some say the hotel remembers, that it holds the echoes of every story it's ever told. But what if it's not just the stories? What if it's the silence that's the real ghost? The staff still talk about the elevator. They say it's not just the lights that flicker or the doors that slam. It's the sound of a woman's voice calling for help echoing down the hall. We've tried everything. Experts, investigators, the paranormal community. But the hotel doesn't give up its secrets easily. And maybe that's the point, it doesn't need to. So we wait. We'll listen. And we wonder, what will the hotel tell us next? And what will it take for the silence to finally break? As the firelight flickers, I can't help but wonder, what if the Stanley Hotel isn't just haunted, but remembering? You've heard the stories, but have you ever considered that some places hold secrets too heavy for words? The hotel may be quiet now, but the echoes of its past are never far, just waiting for the right moment to be heard. Before we move on, let me ask you, what if the Stanley Hotel isn't haunted? What if it's just listening? And remember, dear listener, the most terrifying stories are the ones that never end. You've heard of the Jersey Shore, haven't you? That stretch of sand and sun, where families gather and laughter echoes across the waves. But there's a side to this place you don't see on the tourist brochures. This isn't just a place of summer joy. It's also where, in the early 1900s, a string of disappearances began. Some say the water itself is watching, holding secrets no one has ever solved. Some say the house was the last place these people were seen alive. Others claim it's where the voices still linger, calling out to those who dare to listen. And now, more than a century later, the same place is still whispered about. People say the wind carries their names, and the waves remember what was lost. You remember that summer when the ocean was too calm, and the waves didn't seem to touch the shore? Well, back in 1944, the water was even quieter than that, and the tide held secrets that no one could explain. It started with a few young men from Asbury Park, chasing the thrill of the deep, thinking they were brave enough to take on the sea's mysteries. But the sea doesn't play favorites, especially not with those who dare to disturb its silence. The local police were baffled. No bodies, no evidence, just a few empty bottles and a trail of footprints that led straight into the surf. They called it a disappearance, but the ocean had other plans. Now, decades later, the same shore is still watched by those who remember. Some say the sea is still keeping its secrets, and that the truth of what happened that summer is still waiting to be found. You know how sometimes the sky seems to hold its breath before a storm? Well, that's exactly how it felt that summer. The air was thick, the breeze heavy, and the sun just refused to shine. The kids were acting strange, too quiet, too jumpy. They'd look at the water and just stop, like something was watching, waiting. I told them to come inside, but they wouldn't listen. Then came the whispers. Not from the wind, not from the waves, but from the water itself. I heard at first just a faint, wet sound, like someone was dragging their feet through the sand. People started to go missing. Not all at once, but one by one. A mother said her daughter had just vanished. A man said he saw a shadow in the water, but when he looked, there was nothing. By the time the police arrived, it was too late. They found the bodies, but not the truth. The water still whispers, and the shore still waits. But do you ever wonder what exactly they were waiting for? You know how sometimes the ocean just stops, like it's holding its breath, waiting for something? Well, that's what happened on that day in 1944, when the waves went silent and the shore vanished with them. The girls had just finished their last swim of the day, laughing, their hair wet and tangled, their feet sinking into the warm sand. They were young, carefree, and the sea had always been their playground. The next morning, their bodies were never found. Not a trace of them, not a single piece of clothing, not even a footprint. Just a shore that had swallowed them whole, and a silence that would haunt the coast for decades. To this day, the shore still holds its breath. Some say the water remembers. Others say the sea just wants to be left alone. But one thing is certain, those girls vanished, and the ocean never let them go. I remember the way the air smelled that night, salt and fear. A man from Asbury Park told me he saw the lights flicker like a dying fire, and then nothing. One woman claimed she heard laughter coming from the ocean, but when she looked, there was no one there. Just the sound of waves and the feeling of being watched. A local fisherman swore he saw a figure in the water, but it wasn't human. It moved like smoke, and when he tried to get closer, it just dissolved into the sea. Some say the missing never truly left the shore, that their voices still echo in the wind, and their stories linger in the sand where the waves never reach. It's hard to say what really happened that night, but one thing is certain: those who were there still remember the silence that followed. The first thing they found was a set of footprints in the sand, leading straight into the surf. No one had seen them come in, and no one had seen them go out. They checked the tide records, and it turned out the footprints were made just before the tide came in. The water had covered them, but the sand still held the shape of a human form. One of the last people to see them was a fisherman who said they were laughing and dancing in the waves, like they didn't care if they drowned. He said they looked like they were chasing something. Then there was the radio, which picked up a faint, distorted voice repeating the same phrase over and over. It was just a whisper, but it was enough to make the whole town stop and listen. The more they dug, the more it felt like the ocean itself was trying to tell them something. Something that no one was ready to hear. You know, the thing that's bugged me all along isn't the disappearance itself. It's the one small detail that no one ever seems to talk about. They all say the boys were last seen on the boardwalk, but not one of them remembers the color of the car. Not one. It's like the color was erased from history. You think it's strange? Wait until you hear what the locals say. They call it the ghost car. No one ever saw it, no one ever heard it, but it's always there. And here's the kicker: no one's ever seen the driver. Not the police, not the locals, not even the missing boys' families. It's like the car just appears and disappears, like it's not even real. So you tell me, what happens when a car doesn't have a color? Does it become a ghost? Or does it just become invisible? You've heard the stories, but here's the twist: some locals say the real mystery isn't the missing people, but the ones who stayed behind. They claim the shore never let go of them. One woman, who still lives nearby, insists she saw a shadowy figure on the beach that night. She says it looked like one of the missing, just standing there, not moving. There are those who believe the missing were never really gone, that they haunt the shore in different ways, through dreams, through whispers, through the way the waves sound just a little too familiar. And then there are the ones who say the shore is just a place, that the real mystery is why no one ever leaves, why they stay, even when they should know better. So the question is, what do you believe? That they were taken, or that they never left at all? You know, sometimes the most haunting things aren't the ghosts, but the silence that lingers after they're gone. We've spent years chasing shadows, but the truth, it's still out there, whispering in the dark. The case has been buried in files, forgotten by time, but not by the people who still live with the weight of it. Some say they hear voices in the wind, or feel a chill when they pass by the water. Every year, on the anniversary, some locals gather by the shore, lighting candles, sharing stories, hoping the sea will finally give up its secret. But the ocean is quiet, and so are the waves. And so, the mystery lies on, not in a haunted house, but in the hearts of those who still wait for closure. Maybe the truth is out there, hidden in the waves, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something to enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dove smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You ever notice how the ocean doesn't just reflect the sky, it mirrors the soul? Sometimes it whispers secrets we're not ready to hear. Stories like these don't just vanish. They linger, like the echo of a laugh or the memory of a hand you never saw. And sometimes, the most haunting thing is not the ghost but the truth that refuses to stay buried. So, as we turn the page, remember this: some stories don't end, they just wait for the right season to come back. Now, let's go deeper into the dark, where the next tale begins. You've heard of the Stanley Hotel, haven't you? That grand old place in the Rockies, where the mountains whisper secrets and the wind carries echoes of the past. It's not just a hotel anymore, it's a story waiting to be told. Built in 1909, it was once the tallest building west of the Mississippi, a beacon of luxury and ambition. But the mountains don't forget the dreams of those who dared to stay too long. It's said that the hotel is haunted by the voices of those who never left, guests who vanished into the night, their stories lost in the cold, quiet halls. But the real mystery isn't just the ghosts, it's what happened to them. And if you think the ghosts are the only thing that lingers here, you'd be wrong. There are whispers of disappearances, of people who checked in but never checked out. It's not just the past that haunts this place, it's the silence that follows. So, as we step into the story of the Stanley Hotel, remember this: the most terrifying thing about a haunted place isn't the ghost, it's the feeling that you're not the first to hear the silence. You know, the Stanley Hotel wasn't always the grand, elegant place you see today. Back in the early 1900s, it was a modest little building called the Stanley Hotel, and it was built by a man named George C. Stanley, who had a very particular vision for his creation. Stanley was a businessman with a love for luxury, and he wanted to build a place that would bring the wealthy and the weary together. He saw it as a retreat, a place where people could rest their souls as much as their bodies. But it wasn't just about the money or the name. Stanley had a deeper reason. He believed in the power of the human spirit and wanted to create a space that would soothe the soul. He even called it a sanctuary for the weary and the broken. And so, with his vision and a small team of workers, Stanley laid the foundation for what would one day become the famous Stanley Hotel. But little did he know, the true story of the hotel was only just beginning. The building was a labor of love, and though it started small, it grew into something far greater, a place that would become a symbol of both comfort and mystery. And with that, the Stanley Hotel was born. Not as a haunted place, but as a dream made real, and a place where the echoes of the past would one day find a home. You remember the way the halls felt, like they had a heartbeat of their own. Every step echoed, and the silence between them grew heavier with every passing moment. The first sign was the smell, a faint, metallic tang that clung to the back of your throat, like something had just bled into the air and not left a trace. Then came the whispers, so soft you could almost miss them, just the sound of someone breathing, but not in the room. It was like the walls were holding their own conversation. You tried to laugh it off, like you always do when the old places try to scare you, but the laughter didn't sound like yours. It sounded like it belonged to someone else. And then, just as you turned to leave, the temperature dropped. Not just a chill, but a cold so deep it felt like the room had forgotten how to warm up. You remember the night the lights went out, and the hotel held its breath. The elevator stopped, and the corridors whispered like they knew something we didn't. A guest said they heard a child's laughter, high and clear, echoing through the lobby. But when they turned, the hallway was empty and the laughter was gone. Then came the disappearances, 3 guests in 3 months, all staying in the same wing, all claiming they saw a child in the hallway, and all waking up with the same nightmare. The final guest never returned. They left a note, written in shaky handwriting, saying, "I saw her. She was waiting for me. She said she was lost." And now, every time the hotel closes for the night, the lights flicker, and for a moment, you can hear a child's voice calling from the east wing, calling for help. I remember the first time I heard the whispers in the elevator. It was late, and the only other person was a man in a threadbare suit, muttering to himself in a language I didn't recognize. He didn't look up when I entered, just kept pacing back and forth, his shadow stretching long on the floor. It was like he wasn't even there, just a ghost in a suit. When I stepped out, I felt the weight of his presence behind me, like the hotel itself had remembered him and wasn't ready to let him go. They say the hotel doesn't forget, but sometimes it's the people who remember who stayed the longest. And if you listen closely, you might hear them too, the ones who never left, the ones who are still trying to find their way out. We began by tracing the hotel's original blueprints, and what we found was a labyrinth of hidden rooms, unused staircases, and passages that even the staff had forgotten. It was like uncovering a secret life of the building itself. One of the most unsettling things we found was a series of old photographs. They showed the hotel's basement, but not just any basement. It was a place they'd sealed off decades ago, with a door marked "Do Not Open." Then there were the workers' logs. One of them, from the 1940s, mentioned a strange noise coming from the east wing, like someone was whispering in the walls. But the staff dismissed it as the wind. We also found a list of names, some crossed out, others still in ink. It looked like a list of people who had been here but never left, and some of them were still alive. The deeper we dug, the more the hotel seemed to shift around us, like it was watching, waiting, and maybe even remembering. You know, the thing that haunts me most about the Stanley isn't the ghosts or the whispers, it's the silence. The silence that lingers in the halls like it's holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. It's not the kind of silence you hear, it's the kind that feels like it's listening. Like the hotel itself is waiting for someone to say the wrong word. And then, well, we all know what happens. No one has ever figured out why that silence is there. It's like the hotel remembers something we don't, and it's not telling. You've heard the stories, but the silence? That's the part that's never been explained. So, what do you think? Is it the hotel that's waiting, or is it us? Maybe we're just the ones who forgot to say goodbye. You've heard the whispers, haven't you? Those old timers who still gather in the corner of the diner, speaking in hushed tones about the Stanley Hotel's hidden secrets. They say the walls are listening and the shadows know the truth. Some say it's the hotel itself, a living thing that remembers every guest who ever stayed. Others insist it's the voices of the lost, trapped between the pages of history, waiting for someone to hear them. And then there are the stories about the staff, those who left in the middle of the night, claiming they saw things no one else could. A whisper here, a murmur there, and suddenly, the hotel becomes a place of both wonder and fear. Theories keep changing, like the weather. Some say it's the spirits of the lost travelers. Others say it's the hotel's own grief, echoing through the halls like a slow, sorrowful song. But no one can agree on the truth. And maybe that's the point, because sometimes silence is louder than any scream. You know, sometimes the most chilling stories aren't about the ghosts, but the people who vanish without a trace. And in the Stanley Hotel, that's exactly what we're left with. The last known sighting of the missing guest was in the lobby, where a staff member said she seemed confused, like she was trying to remember something she couldn't quite place. We've searched every room, every corridor, every shadow, but the Stanley Hotel is full of secrets, and some secrets don't want to be found. So here's the thing, maybe the real mystery isn't who she was. Maybe it's why she never left. And maybe the hotel's silence is the only answer we'll ever get. And that, my friends, is the sound of a story that's still waiting to be told. You know, sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest whispers, like the Stanley Hotel, where the walls still remember the laughter and the screams that never left. We all have stories that linger, don't we? Stories that refuse to fade, even when the pages are closed and the candles are snuffed out. And sometimes the best stories are the ones that end with a question, not an answer. Like the Stanley Hotel, which still waits for the next listener to hear its story. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. So, if you're ever in the mood for a tale that lingers in your mind long after the lights go out, I'd say the Stanley Hotel is a good place to start. But remember, dear friends, some stories are best told in the dark and some are best left to the imagination. You've heard of haunted houses, but have you heard of a house that haunts its guests? The Whaley House in San Diego is no ordinary home. It's a place where time seems to fold in on itself, and the past refuses to stay buried. Built in 1857, the Whaley House was once a bustling inn, but it's been abandoned for over a century. Rumors say that every guest who stays there vanishes, no trace, no explanation, just silence. There are stories of people who entered the house and never left. Some say they were taken by the house itself. Others claim they were never there at all. It's a place where the living and the dead seem to share the same air. But what really makes the Whaley House so eerie is the silence. No wind, no sound, just the echo of footsteps that weren't there. And sometimes the sound of a door closing when no one was there to open it. So, dear listener, if you're ever in the mood for a story that lingers in your mind long after the lights go out, I suggest you keep your flashlight close and your curiosity even closer. After all, some secrets don't like to be found. You ever heard of a house that didn't just collect dust, but collected secrets? The Whaley House started in 1857, built by a man named John Whaley, who had a knack for both money and mischief. John was a businessman, a real estate tycoon, and a man with a temper. He built this house not just as a home, but as a statement, a place where he could make his mark on the world. The house became a hub for the town's elite, a place where secrets were exchanged over wine and whispered rumors. But it wasn't long before the walls began to remember what happened inside. The first guests to vanish were the ones who stayed too late, who spoke too freely, and who maybe, unknowingly, stirred the house's ancient spirit. The Whaley House had a story to tell, and it wasn't done yet. And so, the house became more than just a place. It became a witness, a keeper of silence, and a guardian of the past until the past decided to speak for itself. You remember the first time you heard the whisper in the hallway, just before the lights flickered. It wasn't loud, just a soft, familiar voice like someone you once knew, calling your name. It was the same voice that used to call you to dinner, or remind you to take your medicine. You laughed it off at first, thinking it was just the wind or the house settling. But the next night, it was louder. And the smell, it wasn't unpleasant. Not really. Just a faint, familiar scent like lavender or fresh bread or the smell of your own home. But it lingered, and it felt wrong. You started to notice things, little things, like the way the doors would close on their own, or the way the clock on the wall would tick backward. You told yourself it was your imagination, but your heart knew better. And then there was the feeling that you weren't alone. Not in the way that someone is physically there, but in the way that someone is watching. You could feel them, just beyond your line of sight, waiting. You told yourself you were being paranoid, but deep down, you knew something was terribly wrong, and you weren't the only one who had felt it. You know, some of the most chilling moments in the Whaley House aren't the ghosts, but the people who simply vanished. One evening in 1880, a young woman named Clara arrived, all dressed in her finest, with a smile that lit up the room. She was here to meet her fiancé, a traveling merchant who had promised to return the very next day. But when he never came and she never left, the house began to whisper her name in the halls. You can still hear her voice in the silence, a soft, pleading whisper asking if he's coming. The house doesn't answer. It just keeps waiting, just like she did. And that's why you come here, isn't it? To feel the weight of a love that turned to longing, and a home that never lets go. I remember the first time I stepped into the Whaley house. The air felt thick, like it was holding its breath. The floorboards creaked like old friends trying to warn you. One guest said she heard a child's laughter echoing through the halls, but when she turned, there was no one there, just the wind and the sound of something waiting. Some say the house whispers to you, that it knows your secrets. One guest claimed the walls spoke her name, and the echo was so close, she was sure it was the house itself. And then there was the man who swore he saw a woman in a white dress standing at the foot of his bed. She didn't move, she just watched, and when he looked away, she was gone. These are just stories. They're echoes, and the Whaley house it doesn't forget. The investigation began with a single name, Mrs. Haynes, and a single diary page. The local historian, a soft-spoken woman with silver hair, led us through the archives with the patience of someone who had heard every story before. We found her name in a 1947 entry, written in a shaky hand, describing a night when the house hummed like a living thing and the windows shook with a voice not her own. It was a warning, not a record. The local police had no file on her disappearance, but the town's graveyard had a headstone that read simply, "Beloved wife and mother vanished in the silence of the house." No date, no cause. What we found next was more unsettling than the missing woman. Dozens of letters, unsigned, from people who claimed to have seen her, or heard her, or felt her presence in the house long after she was gone. One letter, written in 1953, read, "She walks through the hall with the sound of glass, not feet. I've seen her in the mirror, but when I turn, she's gone. She says she's not alone." By the time we left that night, we had more questions than answers. But one thing was certain, the house wasn't just haunted. It was remembering something it wasn't supposed to. You know, the thing that has always bugged me is that no one ever figured out why they just stopped showing up. No one ever said, oh, they were kidnapped by the ghost, or they were taken by the house. They just vanished. It's like they just blinked out of existence. One moment they were there, the next they weren't, and no one ever saw them go. Not the family, not the servants, not even the neighbors. The only thing they left behind were these little notes, like little warnings. Be careful when you go to sleep, or don't go into the east room. But no one ever followed them. No one ever tried to find them. And then there's the thing about the missing letters. The guests who vanished never sent their letters home. Not one of them. Not a single postmark. It's like the house just swallowed them whole. So you see, it's not just the ghosts that are mysterious. It's the people who were here and the things that happened to them. And the truth? It's still out there, hiding in the dust and the shadows. You've heard the stories, but let me tell you what the locals still whisper. Some say the Whaley house isn't just haunted, it's cursed. They say the walls breathe, and the echoes don't belong to the living. One old man told me he's heard the sound of a woman's laughter in the night, but when he goes to find her, it's just the wind through the eaves. He says it's not the ghost, he says it's the house itself, trying to remember who it was. Some say it's not the house that haunts, it's the history, the blood, the secrets, the lives that were swallowed by the floorboards. The house is just the vessel, and the truth is what haunts the most. And then there are the ones who say the house is still waiting. For someone new. For someone who will stay longer than they should. For someone who will never leave. You've heard the whispers of the Whaley house, but what about the ones that never found their way back? The names are just as faded as the wallpaper, and the stories are more ghost than flesh. Some say they were never really there. Others insist they were taken by the house itself, like a lullaby that lulls you into sleep and never lets you wake up. You might think a mystery like this fades with time, but the Whaley house doesn't forget. It waits like a story that's only just begun. So what do you think happened to them? Did they vanish into the walls, or did the house take them and keep them for good? You know, sometimes the quietest places hold the loudest echoes. The Whaley house isn't just a house, it's a memory, a whisper in the dark, waiting for the right listener. And as we close this tale, I can't help but wonder what stories are still waiting in the silence. What ghosts are still trying to speak, just one whisper away from being heard. Take care, dear listeners, and remember, sometimes the most haunting things are the ones that never leave. Until next time, when the dark gets a little louder and the stories get a little more real. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You've heard of the Priory of Sion, haven't you? a place whispered about in the shadows of history, where secrets have lain buried for centuries. But what if I told you it wasn't just a monastery, but a prison for the devil himself? Picture this, a secluded valley, where the trees lean like conspirators, and the wind carries voices that don't belong to the living. This place was more than a sanctuary, it was a battleground of faith and fear. But the real curse wasn't the stone or the silence, it was the people who dwelled here. Some say they were monks, others claim they were witches, and some say they were possessed. So, what do you think happened here? Was it a place of salvation, or a tomb for the damned? And why did the stories refuse to die, even after all these years? As we step deeper into the story, we'll uncover the true nature of this cursed legacy where faith, fear, and the unknown all collide. You see, it all started in the 12th century, when a noble family named the de Montforts decided to build a grand estate on the banks of the Loire. They called it the Priory of Sion, and it was meant to be a place of learning and spiritual protection. But the de Montforts weren't just scholars, they were also quite the power players. They brought in a group of scholars, monks, and even some alchemists, all under the guise of protecting sacred knowledge from the church. But the church didn't like that kind of power. They saw the priory as a threat, a nest of heretics and secretive scholars. And so, they sent the Inquisition to investigate, to silence the whispers of forbidden knowledge. The Inquisition found the priory hiding what they called the lost wisdom, a secret library of texts and manuscripts that the church feared would lead people away from their faith. And so, the priory was burned, its knowledge lost, its people scattered. But the legacy of the priory didn't die with the flames. Some say its knowledge lives on in secret societies, in hidden manuscripts, and in the whispers of those who still believe the truth was buried too deep to ever be found. You remember the first time you noticed something was off. It was a quiet Tuesday, and the wind had a way of whispering through the trees like it was trying to say something important. You turned your head just enough to catch the sound, but it was gone before you could figure out what it was. The next morning, you found a small, folded note tucked beneath your door. It was written in an old-fashioned script, and it read, "You are not the first to notice." You laughed it off, but your heart gave a strange little twist in your chest. One evening, you saw a shadow move in your kitchen window. You looked up, and for a moment, you swear you saw a woman's face staring back at you, her eyes hollow and full of something you couldn't name. You turned away, but the feeling of being watched never left you. And then, one night, you heard it again, the whisper. This time, it wasn't just the wind. It was a voice, soft and urgent, calling your name. You followed it through the house, through the halls and into the basement, where the light barely reached and the air felt like it was holding its breath. You hesitated at the door, heart pounding. You could feel it, the presence, the weight of something ancient and waiting. You knew, in that moment, that you were no longer alone in the house. And that something, somewhere, had been waiting for you all along. You remember the storm that night, don't you? The sky cracked open like a wound, and the wind howled through the priory's ancient stone like a grieving spirit. The rain fell in sheets, masking the sound of something breaking inside the chapel. The last priest to stay there, Father Elric, vanished without a trace. They say he was found days later, his body half buried in the crypt, his hands clutching a Bible that had been torn open and stained with something dark. They say she was the wife of the first saint, accused of witchcraft, burned at the stake, but her spirit would not rest. Her sorrow turned to vengeance, and the priory became her prison, cursed to guard her memory and the truth she died to protect. Even now, when the wind howls through the broken archways, you can hear her voice in the echo, a low, mournful chant. It's not a warning, it's a plea. But the stones remember, and the past is never truly buried. I remember the way the wind howled through those ancient stone corridors, like a ghost trying to find its way back home. One of the last survivors claimed the priory was alive, watching, waiting. A nurse who worked there in the 1960s swore the walls would hum in the night, as if the priory itself was whispering secrets it wasn't meant to share. A local historian told me about the monks who vanished, their final words being of a presence that watched them from the dark, like an eye in the stone. And then there's the story of the woman who stayed behind. She said the priory gave her a gift, a whisper in her ear, a secret she wasn't meant to know. Some say the priory doesn't just haunt, it tests. And if you're not careful, it takes you in, just like it took the others. We followed the trail of whispers, chasing rumors of the priory's hidden chambers. The deeper we dug, the more the silence seemed to grow louder, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. One night, in the stillness of the priory, I found a sealed box buried beneath the floorboards. It was marked with a symbol I'd seen only in the oldest texts, something ancient, something forgotten. The box contained a ledger, its pages brittle with time. It spoke of secret rituals, of a brotherhood bound by faith and fear, and of a final act, something that was never meant to be revealed. As we pieced together the fragments, a pattern began to emerge. The priory wasn't just haunted by ghosts, it was haunted by the weight of its own secrets and the people who once walked its halls. You know, there's one thing about the priory of Sion that still haunts me. No one can explain why the original charter was never found. It's like the past just vanished. And that silence? It's louder than any ghost. They say the charter held the truth about the priory's founding, but no one knows where it went. Some say it was stolen, others that it was burned, and still, no one can say for sure. What if it was never there to begin with? Some people believe the charter was never real, that the whole thing was just a clever cover for something else. But if that's true, what did they hide? And why does the priory still feel like it's watching us? Maybe the real curse isn't the ghosts or the secrets. Maybe it's the silence, the one detail that has never been explained. And that silence? It's the most terrifying thing of all. You've heard the tales of the priory's dark past, but here in the village, the stories take on a life of their own. Some say the stones remember, and the wind carries their whispers to those who listen closely. One local legend claims the priory was built not by monks, but by a secret order of witches who were never excommunicated. They left behind a curse, and the land itself has never been the same. And then there are the whispers of a hidden chamber beneath the priory, where secrets from centuries ago still lie buried. Some say it's a tomb, others a vault, but no one has ever dared to go looking. In the end, the truth may never be known, but the stories live on, passed from one generation to the next, keeping the priory's spirit alive in the hearts of those who still believe. And still, the truth remains elusive, like a ghost that won't quite step into the light. Some say the priory of Sion is a mirror, reflecting the darkest corners of our own history. We've chased whispers through centuries, but the past has a way of hiding its secrets in plain sight, waiting for the right question. Perhaps the real mystery isn't the priory itself, but the silence that surrounds it, like a secret too sacred to speak, or too painful to remember. So, my dear listeners, what do you think? Is the past a puzzle we can solve, or a riddle that was never meant to be unraveled? You walk with me through the shadows of history, through echoes of the past that still whisper in the dark. But remember, the stories don't end when the candlelight fades. Sometimes the most chilling things are the ones we don't quite understand, like a name, a place, or a legend that lingers just beyond the edge of memory. And always, always remember that the best stories are the ones that live in your heart long after the last word is spoken. So, as we part ways, I leave you with this. What will your next story be? Stay curious, stay gentle, and never stop listening for the quiet voices in the dark. Until we meet again, under the same stars with the same stories to tell. You've heard of places that just stop time. The Pendergrass Farm isn't just a place, it's a memory, a whisper in the wind. You ever felt like the world behind you is watching? The farm's been empty for decades, but the locals still talk about the girls who vanished there. You ever wonder what happens to a place when it's forgotten? Sometimes, it remembers you. It's not just the silence that gets to you, it's the way the air feels like it's holding its breath. You ever felt like you were being watched, but you couldn't tell where the eyes were? Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40 tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The stories say the farm took them like they were never here. You ever wonder if the silence is the last thing they heard? This place doesn't just haunt, it remembers, and it's waiting for you to come closer. You see it now, that old red brick farmhouse, its windows like eyes, watching the world pass by. It's been standing there for over a century, just like it's been standing there for the souls that never left. Back in the 1870s, the Pendergrass family was known for their wealth and influence, but there was a darkness to their legacy, a secret buried in the soil beneath their feet. His wife, Margaret, was his closest confidante, and his daughter, Eleanor, was his greatest disappointment. She was beautiful, sharp, and too curious for her own good. The last known sighting of Eleanor was the night she vanished. The family claimed she had run off with a lover, but the town knew better. Some say she was taken, others say she took herself. What happened in that house that night is still a mystery, but the echoes of it linger in the silence. And now, the house waits for someone to listen. You remember the way the air felt on the first day, how it clung to your skin like a memory you couldn't quite recall. It was warm, but there was a hush about it, like the world had forgotten to breathe. The children said the trees were whispering, but you laughed it off. You thought they were just playing, or maybe just dreaming. You never thought they'd be right. The last time you saw the place, it was quiet. Too quiet. The silence was like a blanket, heavy and unyielding, pressing down on your chest. You didn't know what to make of it then. You told yourself it was just a place, just a house with a past. But sometimes you look at the windows and swear you saw someone standing there, just for a second, before it was gone. And then, the silence stopped, and the whispers began again, louder this time, and you knew, somehow, that something had changed, and it was never going to be the same again. You remember the night the lights went out and the wind howled like a lost child. It was then that the Pendergrass farm began to whisper its truth, one word at a time. The last man to leave the house was found the next morning, his boots still by the door, his coat missing, and his hands in his pockets, as if he'd never meant to go anywhere. Neighbors said the air smelled like old bread and something sweet and sour, like the last bite of a cake left to rot in the sun. And then, the silence. No footsteps, no voices, just the sound of the wind, and the feeling that someone had been waiting for you to come back. They never found his body, but they found a note, tucked inside a shoebox, written in his own hand, and it said, "I didn't mean to stay." I remember the way the wind would howl through the old Pendergrass barn, like it was trying to carry a message. Some say it was the last whisper of a lost child. A farmer's wife once told me she saw a little girl in the field, wearing a red dress, dancing alone at dusk. She didn't chase it, just stood there, watching. Old Mr. Hargrove claimed he heard the child's laughter late at night, echoing from the woods. He said it was a sound that didn't belong to this world. Even the dogs would stop barking when the wind shifted just right. It's like the farm was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Some say the child never left the farm. Others say she was never there to begin with. But the wind still carries her name, and it's not a happy one. The first thing they found was a rusted iron gate, half buried in weeds, its hinges frozen in place. It looked like it hadn't moved in decades, not even for the wind. When they pried it open, the air inside smelled like damp earth and something sweetly rotting. It was like stepping into a memory that had forgotten to fade. Inside, they found a room that had once been a nursery, its walls painted in faded pastels, and a rocking chair still in the corner, like it had been waiting for a child to come home. The investigators noticed something odd. The dust on the floor was disturbed, as if someone had recently walked through it, but no one was there to say who. And then, in the attic, they found a locked box, untouched for years, with a note inside that read, "Don't look too closely or you'll never leave." You know, the thing that haunts me most isn't the voices or the shadows, it's the silence. The silence that lingers after the last scream fades. It's the sound of nothing at all, and it's the only thing that never gets explained. The farmers said it was a place where the wind whispered secrets, but the wind never spoke about where the children went, just about what they left behind. No one knows what happened that day. Not the neighbors, not the town records, and certainly not the ones who vanished. It's like the earth itself has chosen to forget. And that's the thing, the one detail that haunts us all. Not the screams, not the ghostly laughter, but the silence that says, we were here and we're gone. You've heard the whispers, haven't you? That the Pendergrass farm wasn't just a place, it was a mirror, and some folks say it reflected the worst in people. Some say the farm was cursed by the blood of those who died there, and that it's not the ghosts that haunt the place, it's the memory of what happened. There's talk of a secret room beneath the house, where the family kept their darkest secrets. Some say it was where the children were taken, and others say it was where they were hidden. The locals say the farm doesn't just take people, it takes the stories of those who come to uncover the truth. Some say it's a lesson in what happens when you dig too deep. And still, the stories live on. Not in the headlines, but in the hushed conversations at the diner, in the way the wind howls through the trees at night, and in the silence that follows every new disappearance. You followed this story through the decades, through the whispers and the silence, but the truth remains just out of reach. What if the answers are hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to look again? We've searched every corner of that land, but the mystery refuses to be solved. Maybe the house itself is the keeper of the truth, and it's not ready to let it go. Sometimes the most haunting things are the ones we can't see. Maybe the house is still waiting for someone to come back, to listen, to remember. And so, we leave you with the question, not for the answer, but for the silence. What if the real mystery isn't what happened, but why it still haunts us? You've heard the whispers of the Pendergrass farm, but have you ever wondered what happens when the lights go out and the silence becomes a language of its own? Sometimes, the most haunted places aren't the ones you see, they're the ones that simply disappear. The stories never end. They just fade into the wind, like the last breath of someone who never made it home. And as you leave, you might just catch a glance in the rearview mirror, a flicker of movement, a shadow that wasn't there before. But remember, some stories are best left to the night, and some voices never quite leave. You've heard of haunted houses, but have you ever heard of a house that haunts its guests? The Whaley House in San Diego, California, is a place where the past refuses to stay buried. Built in the 1850s, this house has seen more than its share of drama. From Civil War battles to Prohibition-era secrets, the Whaley House has been a stage for tragedy and mystery. The Whaley House is more than a building. It's a living memory, a place where time seems to slow and the air feels heavier, as if the house itself is watching. So, what do you think? Is it the house that's haunted, or is it the people who come to it? I'll tell you what happened to those who stayed too long. You remember the first time you heard of the Whaley House? It was a story told around a kitchen table over a cup of tea by someone who claimed they'd been there. They said the walls didn't just remember, they screamed asterisk. The house was built in 1857 by a man named William Whaley, a wealthy businessman with a reputation for being a bit eccentric. He built it with a purpose, you see, a place to test his theories about the afterlife. You remember the first time you heard that whisper in the hallway, just before the lights flickered out. It wasn't loud, just a soft, familiar voice calling your name, like someone you'd left behind. The next morning, the maid found a folded piece of paper on the bedroom floor, written in a trembling hand. It said, "I didn't mean to stay." The words were wet, as if they'd been written in the rain. The cook found a mirror in the east wing, cracked and clouded, but it showed something that wasn't there. A figure, just a silhouette, standing in the corner where the light didn't reach. Then came the missing letters, small, delicate notes slipped under doors, each one a different name. Some were signed, others weren't, but they all said the same thing, "I'm not ready to leave." By the time the first guest went missing, the house had begun to remember. It wasn't just the walls, it was the silence, the cold, the way the air seemed to hold its breath just before the door closed. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you enjoy, take a look at the Amazon Echo Dove smart speaker. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. You know, the real horror didn't start with ghosts, it started with a woman named Lavinia Whaley, who vanished without a trace in 1859. She was the one who first reported the whispers in the halls, the cold hands on her neck, the feeling that she was being watched by something that had been there all along. Her husband, John, swore she was in the garden that night, but no one saw her. The garden was empty, the roses were in full bloom, and the air was thick with the scent of petrichor and something wrong. They found her dressed the next morning, covered in mud and blood, near the river. But no body, just a dress, a trail of footprints, and the sound of her voice echoing from the house, calling for help, but no one heard her. Some say she was taken by the house itself, that the walls had been waiting for someone to make them real. Others say she was never there at all. But one thing's certain, no one who has ever stayed in the house has been the same since. I remember the first time I walked through the Whaley house. The air was thick, like someone had just closed a door on a humid summer night. You could hear the creak of the floorboards, like the house was breathing. One guest said she saw a figure in the hallway, dressed in 19th century clothes, standing just outside her door. She turned around, and it was gone. But the door was slightly ajar, like it had been opened by someone or something. Another guest claimed she heard a child's laughter echoing from the basement. She went down to check, but the door was locked. When she tried to open it, the sound stopped, and the door was warm to the touch, like someone had been sitting there. There was a man who said he saw the ghost of a woman in the dining room, holding a baby. He described her as pale and sad, with long, flowing hair. He said he could see the baby's face, and it was the same as the baby he had lost years ago. Some of these stories are heartbreaking, others are just plain weird. But they all have one thing in common: they feel real. Like the house is telling us something, and we're just not listening. We dug into the old records, and what we found was more than just names. There were letters, diary entries, and even a few photographs. The more we read, the more we realize the Whaley house wasn't just a place, it was a character in its own right. One letter, dated 1892, described a guest who vanished mid-meal. The writer spoke of a woman in a blue dress, her laughter echoing through the halls. The next morning, she was gone, and no one knew where she'd gone. There were rumors of a hidden door in the basement, but no one could find it. One investigator, a man named Thomas, claimed he felt a pull toward the stairs, but when he went down, the door was gone. He never returned. We also found a map, drawn in 1885, that showed a path through the woods leading to a small clearing. A note beside it said she went there. No one knew who she was, but the map led to a spot where no one had ever found a body. What we uncovered wasn't just about the missing guests, it was about the house itself. It was as if the Whaley house had its own will, and it had no intention of letting go of its secrets. You've heard the stories, but there's one thing that's always bugged me. No one knows why the Whaley house guests never returned. Not a single one. It's like they just disappeared into the walls. Some say it's the house itself, that it's been waiting for centuries to swallow its visitors whole. But what if it's not the house? What if it's something else entirely? I've spent years chasing every clue, every rumor, and there's always been one thing that feels off. Like the house isn't just haunted, it's hiding something. So I ask you, dear listener, what if the real mystery isn't where they went, but what they left behind? What if the house isn't just remembering, it's waiting for someone to ask the right question? You've heard the tales of the Whaley House, but what about the people who vanished? Some say the house itself is a character with a mind of its own and a taste for the dramatic. Others whisper that the house is just a mirror, reflecting the darkest corners of the human soul. It doesn't take a ghost to make a person disappear, it takes fear, and sometimes a little madness. There are theories, of course. Some say the house was built on an old burial ground, others that it was cursed by a witch. But the most chilling one, that it doesn't take a ghost to vanish, it takes a person who's already lost. And if you ever find yourself walking those halls, remember, the house doesn't just take the lost, it takes the ones who think they've already found peace. And yet, the Whaley House isn't just a place of ghosts, it's a mystery that refuses to be solved. Every year, new clues surface, like whispers in the wind, and every time, they lead us deeper into the dark. The police closed the case in 1899, but the story never ended. Some say the house is still waiting for someone to ask the right questions. Others say it's just waiting for the right person to come back. And so, the house remains. A place of silence and stories, where the past refuses to stay buried. It's not just haunted, it's alive, and it's still waiting. The mystery is unresolved, but the house is never silent. It speaks in whispers, in footsteps, in the way the wind howls through the cracks. And if you listen closely, you might just hear it calling your name. You know, sometimes the most unsettling silence is the one that follows a story. It's like the house is holding its breath, waiting for you to leave too. And you know what? The ghosts don't just vanish. They linger in the corners of your mind, like a half-remembered lullaby that just doesn't quite fit. But maybe that's the point. Maybe these places don't want to be forgotten. Maybe they want to be remembered, just a little bit, in the quietest way. So as you go, I'll be here, just a little bit behind you, with a story and a candle. Ready for the next one? You've heard of the haunted castles and the cursed forests, but Elgin Cathedral? That's a place where the stones themselves seem to hold their breath. It's in the heart of Scotland, where the wind howls like a ghost trying to be heard. Built in the 12th century, this place has stood through centuries of war, fire, and time. But locals say it's not the ruins that whisper, it's the cathedral itself that remembers. Some say the echoes you hear are the prayers of the long dead, lingering in the vaults beneath. Others insist it's the sound of footsteps, never quite reaching the floor, always just out of sight. And then there are the stories of a priest who vanished without a trace, of a child's laughter that never fades, and of a ghost who waits for the right moment to be seen. So, what do you think? Is it the silence that speaks, or the silence that listens? I'll tell you more about the whispers that never stop and the souls that still call this place home. You know, the cathedral wasn't always a place of prayer and peace. Back in the 12th century, it was a battleground of ideas, a place where faith and power clashed like thunder in a storm. The first stone was laid by King David, but it was the 14th century Scots who really shaped the cathedral into what we see today, with its soaring spires and intricate carvings. But not all who worked on the cathedral were builders, they were also warriors, heretics, and even accused witches. Some say their whispers still echo through the stone. There were rumors of secret chambers and hidden altars, places where the line between devotion and danger blurred. And some say the walls still remember the voices that once filled them. So when we step into the cathedral now, we're not just walking through history, we're walking through the echoes of those who came before, their stories still clinging to the stone. You remember the first time you heard it, didn't you? A faint, almost musical hum, like the cathedral was breathing, or maybe it was just you. But you weren't alone in that room. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't silent either. You tried to shake it off, told yourself it was just the wind or the echo of a long-ago procession. But the walls seemed to lean closer, as if listening. You tried to ignore it at first, to pretend it wasn't there, but the whispers grew louder and the hum became a steady, pulsing beat like a heart or a warning. You knew then something was wrong. You looked around, expecting to see someone, but the room was empty. Just the stone, the silence, and the sound. And for the first time, you wondered if the cathedral was trying to tell you something. You left that night, heart pounding, not knowing if it was fear or something far more ancient that had just reached out to you. But you knew one thing for sure, the cathedral wasn't finished with you. You've heard the whispers in the stone, but have you ever wondered what happened to the boy who vanished in the crypt? His laughter echoes still, but the silence that follows is what truly chills me. The night he disappeared, the cathedral was still and heavy with the scent of old incense and damp stone. A child's footstep could be heard in the vaults, but no one was there to answer. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Stanley Quencher 40 tumbler. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. The monks say the walls remember, that they've held secrets for centuries, and that some doors are meant to stay closed. but I've seen the boy's face in the stained glass, and it's not the same as the one in the church records. I wonder, if you were to walk those halls alone, would you hear it too? The whisper, the laughter, the call of the child who never grew up. And if you did, would you ever find your way back out? Before you go, if you enjoyed this, please give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And tell us in the comments what you'd like us to make next. We read every single one. Thank you so much for watching. Comment this emoji if you made it to the end.